tonight. Um, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Tonight, we're going to talk about many very serious things, things that make us very angry, things that get our blood boiling. It is summertime. I am here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I'm actually in the Bay Ridge neighborhood of Brooklyn. And so I've been in the middle of it all day. I didn't participate in any protests or anything, but just because I happen to live in Bay Ridge, I've been hearing the helicopters go over my head. I was sitting in my favorite little restaurant and I watched a huge march of thousands of people go by earlier. And, my wife was coming home from a meeting she went to. And on the way home, she saw the protesters on the highway. And I've had to shut the windows here in order to do this live. I had to shut the windows in order to do this live because of the fact that the helicopters are so damn loud here in the neighborhood. So we're right here in the middle of it. We are right here in the middle of it, and I've got plenty to say. And I've got plenty to say. Shout out to all the people that were out in the streets of Brooklyn today, or out in the streets of Los Angeles, or out in the streets of Chicago. We've seen a huge upsurge of protests against Israel and their atrocities against the Palestinians. And like I said, as a journalist and reporter, I don't do that kind of thing anymore, but I couldn't escape it because I live in a neighborhood. It is the center of Muslims in New York City. I mean, it's the Muslim neighborhood of New York City. And because of that, I saw it all around me today. And I'm going to talk about everything going on, but I want to just calm down. I want everyone to just breathe with me a little bit. Breathe in, breathe out. It's important to try and keep a clear head in these times. So breathe in, breathe out. Right? We want to talk about these things in a calm way. We don't want to get too worked up. We don't want to let our emotions get the best of us. We want to be coherent. We want to think logically and clearly. And a lot of things have happened. So the way we do our show tonight, the way we do our show is we generally, we do the opening remarks that I give. Then from there, we do our roll call, where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then after that, we generally, at that point, answer the super chat questions. So I have my pen here, and as your super chats come in, I will write down your super chats, and then I will answer them in the second half of the show. So that's how it works. So keep the super chats rolling in. I write them down as we go on here. After I give my opening remarks, then at that point we do the roll call, and then after the roll call, I answer your super chats, and then after that, we're done. And that's how the show works. So be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Be sure to put this on Reddit. Be sure to put this on Facebook. Be sure to put this on Twitter. And we are going to try and stay calm tonight. We are going to try to not let our angry, ugly side come out as much as we may want it to come out. We're going to try to speak clearly. We're going to try to speak clearly and with intention. And we're not going to get too out of hand. We are going to get fired up tonight. I'm warning you folks, I will get fired up about some of the stuff that we're talking about tonight will get me fired up. But we are going to try to keep it on an even level, right? We don't want this to turn into the most negative, hostile conversation, right? I try to spread optimism on my lives. I try to spread hope. I try to bring people together. That's what I try to do. So we don't want it to get too ugly. And I'm writing down unions, and low-wage police state, and merch, government of action. Very good. And, I'm writing down the super chats, and there we go. So we'll jump right into the opening remarks. And again, at some point tonight, it will get very shrill. You will probably hear me yelling, which I know you all love. You all love when I start to yell. So have no fear. I will do plenty of yelling tonight, but I'm going to try to keep things at a higher level. I'm going to try to not get too shrill because that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to spread negativity and rage and hate. That's not what I'm really here to do. Overton window. You know, that's not what I'm here to do. Okay? So we want to try to keep an even head, but we're going to talk about things that make me angry. Usually I come on here with like a prepared speech where I'm like educating about historical events or I'm commenting on news events, but tonight I am basically just going to go over a series of things that are pissing me off. And that's why I'm trying to be calm, because generally things that piss me off get me fired up. And tonight we're going to talk mainly about three things that really piss me off. And so because of that, one of them doesn't really piss me off. It's kind of a quandary I'm in. But the first three are things that piss me off, and we're going to talk about them. Things that make me angry. So here we go. The first thing that I want to talk about, at risk of sounding cliche, even though everyone else is talking about it on social media, it must be discussed. Israel. Wow. What they are doing right now. Today they blew up the building where the Associated Press and Al Jazeera are located. They have been unleashing a campaign of airstrikes and violent terror against the Palestinians. It has been ruthless. It has been ugly. And the whole world is saying to them, what are you doing? You know, it's horrific, right? The ugly aspects of the settler colonial Israeli government are being revealed to the world. The crimes against the Palestinians. And, of course, we are here in New York City. And while I was in a neighborhood today where there was a very big march in support of the Palestinians, I was sitting in a restaurant and I watched the march right by. Okay, Ben Norton, two-part. I watched them go by. Very big demonstration. The Muslim community, the political left marching through Brooklyn, and that was very heartening to see. And it got pretty militant. They were on the highway, from what I understand. My wife was walking by and she saw them, on the bridge over the highway. She saw them on the highway. There were fireworks that went off. I don't know if the protesters set them or what that. I was walking home from the restaurant in my neighborhood, and fireworks were exploding in the middle of the street. And I was a little bit scared that someone was shooting up the protest or something, but it was only fireworks, thank goodness. And helicopters have been flying over the neighborhood here. I have closed all the windows in my apartment, even though it's a nice hot day, because I want to talk to you all without the sound of helicopters. It was an intense situation here in Bay Ridge, here in Brooklyn, New York. Rampant pedophilia on the right. And it's been an intense situation, very intense situation. Yeah, it's been very intense. Very intense. So, here in New York City, and I did not grow up in New York City. I'm from a small town in Ohio. Most of the people in my small town were supporters of Israel, but they didn't support Israel on the basis of, of traditional classic Zionism. It wasn't on the basis of we need a Jewish state. It was more on the basis of they were evangelical Christians, they were Republicans, they were conservatives. Israel was in the Bible. Their pastors told them that as Christians it was their duty to support Israel because it was in the Bible, because of the book of Revelations. And so based on that, support for Israel I did here growing up, but it wasn't the same kind. When I moved to New York City, I encountered right-wing Zionism, right-wing, classic, hardline Netanyahu Likudnik Zionism. I worked at an insurance company for a little bit. I worked at another place for a little bit. I've been handing out newspapers on the subways for years and handing out leaflets, and I have encountered right wing Zionism. And every time there's a really intense situation like what's going on, right, with Palestine and what's going on right now, you always get a full mobilization of right wing Zionists. And these right wing Zionists come out and in full force, and you really have to live here to see it. The media does a very good job of covering it up. The media does a very good job. If they have someone talk about Israel Palestine, they'll bring on, for example, they'll bring on the lawyer. What's the very famous lawyer? What's his name? Alan Dershowitz, right? He's a very famous lawyer who's considered a vehement Zionist and an enthusiastic supporter. Putin political compass, very enthusiastic supporter of Israel, and his writings have been debunked by, Norman Finkelstein. Norman Finkelstein just ripped him apart, but he's very supportive of Israel. You'll have Israeli diplomats who come on the news who will make, careful arguments, etc. But the typical right-wing Zionists that you meet in New York City are some of the stupidest people I've ever met, number one. They are some of the most racist people I have ever met, number two. And number three, they are some of the most delusional people I have ever met. Right-wing New York City Zionists are unbelievable. And there are many liberal Zionists who see things completely different than they do, and there are many Jews who are anti-Israel. So this is not an anti-Jewish thing at all, right? I mean, the streets of my neighborhood today were full of Jewish people from New York who oppose Israel. Liberal Zionists don't talk this way and don't make these kind of arguments, but the right-wing Zionists, that there is a huge concentration of them in New York City, these people are so unbelievably racist and so unbelievably stupid and so unbelievably delusional. It is shocking to me, right? I will never forget the day. I was sitting at the insurance company. I just started working at this insurance company. I'm working there. I'd been there maybe 2 weeks. One of my coworkers, says, oh, do you know a good beach to go to? And I said, well, no, I'm not really from here. I don't know the beaches very well. And she's like, yeah, I was taking my kid to the beach the other day, but there were too many black people and too many Latinos and Hispanics there. And so I don't want to go to that beach anymore because, they all hate Jews. I was just like, what did she just say? People are racist. We all know people are racist. But generally, people that are racist know that they shouldn't come out and just say that, especially in a workplace, that they should, filter it, right? That they, but no, she just said right there, all black people, all the black people and all the Latinos, they all just hate Jews. So I didn't want to take my kid. I took my kid to this beach and there were too many black people, too many Latinos. I didn't want to take him back there. And I was just like, whoa. It's like you don't talk that way openly. If one has those views, they know there's a serious social consequence for having racist views like that, number one. Number two, in a workplace especially, right? And there were black and Latino people who worked in this workplace who could have heard her. She didn't care. And the culture among right-wing Zionists is that it is okay to talk this way. Another thing that she shared with me was that she was trying to find a movie theater to take her son to go to see the movies. There was a movie he wanted to see, and there was a movie theater in the neighborhood that I now live in, Bay Ridge, New York. And she said, my son doesn't want to go to that movie theater in Bay Ridge because there is a mosque near the movie theater, and he believes they will blow up the movie theater. And I said, what? And she said to me, yeah, my son, he goes to Hebrew school, and they show him movies, and he's seen so many films about what the Arabs do to us and how all Arabs want to kill all Jews, that he's afraid to go to the movie theater. He's afraid to go to the movie theater in New York City that is near a mosque because he believes, based on his indoctrination at his Hebrew school, he believes that the Muslims in this mosque near the movie theater will blow up the movie theater. Now, this is a child, she's complaining. She's complaining about this. She doesn't agree that this is going to happen, but she's complaining about this. But it's like, what kind of indoctrination are they giving a small child? That a kid is afraid to go to a movie theater in a metropolitan area because he's been so brainwashed that all Arabs, all Muslims are vicious Jew-hating murderers, that he is convinced that if he goes to a movie theater in a Muslim neighborhood, he's going to be blown up. You know, what kind of brainwashing and hate are these people teaching their children, right? I mean, it's vile. It's vile. And again, the media does a good job of covering this up. You don't hear this. I was informed by one of my coworkers that all religions other than Judaism are something people have invented in order to kill Jews. That was one thing I was told, right? That I was told, and this was a Hasidic Jew who I worked with, informed me that, the Jewish religion, according to him, this is his rendition. This is what I was told. I am not representing the Jewish religion and I know many Reform Jews who don't feel this way, many conservative Jews do not feel this way, many Orthodox Jews don't feel this way, but according to my Hasidic coworker, at the beginning of time, God offered the Torah to all mankind, and every race or tribe rejected it except for the Jews. The Jews accepted the Torah. And so all the other religions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, all the other religions were invented by the tribes that rejected the Torah because they wanted to justify murdering and killing Jews. And I mean, he told me this with a straight face, knowing that I grew up as a Christian, knowing that I came from a Christian background. He told me straight up that, it's just a fact that all other religions were invented by tribes and races that rejected the Torah because they want to kill us. And it's like, how does one think that way? I mean, that level of delusion, right? That every other religion is just somehow a conspiracy to murder Jews. That is nuts. I mean, that is nuts, right? There's classic examples. You can go down the line. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's a chant that you hear at pro-Palestine rallies. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. According to right-wing Zionists, this means drown Jews. Now, I don't know how they get that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Meaning that, there's a river on one side, there's an ocean, the Mediterranean on the other side, and they want all Palestinians to be free. Somehow, according to right-wing Zionists, this means that we should round up, this is the Palestinians announcing to the world that they intend to round up all Jews and forcibly drown them in the Mediterranean. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know how they get that from that. It's like, the sky is blue. But this is what they believe. This is what they believe, and they get very fired up. Very fired up. Very, very, very fired up if you disagree with them. No, it is a fact that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, means murder all Jews. Now, I don't know how they get this. I don't know where this comes from, but they swear by it. This is a fact. They know it to be true. It is absolutely 100% true, and they swear by it, right? And they can't be racist. This has also been explained to me, right? That woman, who said that she doesn't want to take her kid to the beach because there's black and Hispanic people. She's not racist. She's not racist because only Jews are victims of racism. So she's not racist. I don't know how that works, but there's only racism against Jews, she explained to me, right? That the racism that other groups have endured is made up in order to belittle what happens to Jews, right? That's another belief, right? I was informed that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was an anti-Semite. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was a supporter of Israel, and many Jewish people marched with him in the civil rights demonstrations. But Martin Luther King Jr., according to many of my right-wing Zionist co-workers, Martin Luther King Jr. was an anti-Semite because he was organizing black people. And whenever another race is being organized, it's because they're planning to kill Jews. Right? This level of delusion, right, which is basically, the rest of the human race are a bunch of vile, hateful subhumans who are looking for any excuse to round us all up and kill us. And so therefore it's okay to be blatantly racist against them. It's okay for Israel to commit atrocities and murder people. It's all okay because the rest of the human race, especially people that aren't white, are a bunch of vile, subhuman, murderous anti-Semites, and so basically it's all okay. But then it gets even better. It's not just that all of Israel's atrocities are justified. There are no Israeli atrocities, okay? You can Google this, right? I heard it from my coworkers, but if you don't believe me, which maybe you don't believe me, you can Google this. Pallywood. Google this, Pallywood. Pallywwood. Pallywood. All the atrocities that Israel commits, all the bombings of civilians, all the detention of children, it's all made up. It's all staged. This is commonly believed by right-wing Zionists, that all of Israeli atrocities are faked. They're all a big hoax. They're all a big hoax. They're all made up. They're Pallywood. They never happened. And this was explained to me by my coworkers, that one time they saw a video where somebody was blown up and they said it was a Palestinian and it was actually a Jewish person. So that proves that clearly all the reports in Western media of Israeli atrocities are Pallywood, that Palestinian Hollywood, they're fake. They're fake. And Israelis believe this, that all the alleged crimes by the Israeli government, it's all a big hoax. Geez, there's well-documented crimes that the whole world has seen, but it's all a hoax. Now, does this remind you of some other people that talk about well-documented crimes? Never mind. Anyway, I'm not going to go there. But anyway, but yes, all of Israeli atrocities, according to right-wing Zionists, not all Zionists, liberal Zionists don't see it this way, but according to right-wing Zionists, it's all a big hoax, right? It's all Pallywood. There has never been Israeli atrocities, never been Israeli massacres. They don't torture Palestinians, and they know this is a fact because the life expectancy of Palestinians is very good, or something like that. Another thing, another classic, and this would happen when I would go out on the subways and leaflet and argue with people, is that like Zionists, right-wing Zionists, want to argue with you about treaties. And so they'll see that you're pro-Palestine or whatever, and they'll say, oh, well, according to the Treaty of 1400 that was signed in the year of 1750 in the time of... And they just start going on about all these obscure treaties. And you're just like, I don't care. I think what they're doing to the Palestinians is wrong. Yes, but don't you know about how in the Magna Carta, in the year of 1375, there was a decree that all states... And I'm like, again, I don't care. I look at what they're doing to the Palestinians, and I say that's wrong. But they want to play this really elaborate word game about all these treaties that they have memorized. And I think they do this at some of the right-wing Hebrew schools. They memorize. It's kind of like Christian apologetics, where it's they want to argue. The evangelical Christian kids, they learn that a rock can't break away from another rock, so therefore God exists and the whole Bible is true or something. It's one of those logical one question leads to another question. But I sit there and I just want to play this game with me where I'm we're going to argue about how the U.S. Constitution is actually based on this other document, and therefore, according to this treaty and this document, Israel is totally justified in everything they do. I mean, it's this, and it's I'm supposed to be persuaded by this, and I look at them, I'm just yeah, I don't like what they're doing to Palestinians. And they're just yeah, but there are all these treaties. I've memorized 100 treaties to explain why. And it's that's a weird thing. Right-wing Zionism grinds my gears. And what is particularly interesting, there's a couple other observations I want to make about right-wing Zionists. Observation number one. We live in an age where people get caught on their cell phones talking about racism. All right, I mean, we're not talking about racism, being racist, right? Somebody, is being a racist, and somebody films them, and it goes viral. It goes viral, and those people like lose their job and get canceled. And there's, I mean, that happens, right? I mean, if you're, I mean, if somebody's somewhere and they're using the N-word or something, someone will pull out their phone and film them, and they generally go viral and they lose their job, and it's a big thing. This never happens to right-wing Zionists. Why? I don't get it. They can have demonstrations, demonstrations, where they are wearing JDL t-shirts. That's for the Jewish Defense League. That's Meir Kahane. That's a terrorist who murdered civilians. And, they can chant like, gas the Arabs, and, I mean, but it's like they never go viral. They never get canceled. It's weird. Right-wing Zionists, like I said, I mean, I've told you how blatantly racist they are. How blatantly racist they are. Just blatantly racist, right? All Muslims are terrorists. All black and brown people are inferior. Just vile, open racism. And I've yet to this day, have I ever seen a video of a right-wing Zionist that someone filmed, and they go viral, and they lose their job, and all. It never happens. It's very interesting, isn't it? Isn't it interesting that, like, of all the people that say racist shit in the United States, and then lose their job, and lose their house, and get doxxed, and it, like, destroys their life, that never happens to these right-wing Zionists. They walk around New York City, saying nasty things about black people, saying nasty things about Latinos, saying nasty things about all Muslims, and they never get canceled for it. Never, never. I mean, never happens, right? Now, occasionally there will be like people that are right-wing Zionists that get canceled for other stuff. Like I believe there was a Trump supporter who was a right-wing Zionist who like yelled that he wanted to like call ICE on some people in a restaurant or something, and he got canceled, and he was a right-wing Zionist, but it wasn't for right-wing Zionist stuff that he got canceled for. It was for just Trump supporter anti-immigrant stuff. Okay, left-wing Jews called traitors. It's very, very, very interesting, right? It's like the cancel culture seems to just kind of skip right-wing Zionists. The media kind of covers up for them. It doesn't give them attention. And it's just kind of, it's very interesting. Now the other thing that is worth mentioning is that and I hate to circle back to this, right? I mean, forgive me if I almost have a one-track mind here. Not the most important aspect of this conversation at all, but BreadTube, right? BreadTube is very critical of Israel. Good. I'm glad. But a lot of BreadTube's arguments against me sound an awful lot like these weird right-wing Zionist arguments, right? Like I've told you, right-wing Zionists say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, somehow means kill all Jews. It clearly doesn't, but that's what they believe. BreadTube says that when I say international bankers, I couldn't possibly mean the International Monetary Fund or the, God forbid, the World Bank or, banks that are international. They say somehow that means Jews. That sounds an awful lot like right-wing Zionist arguments, doesn't it? They also claim that that wanting a government of action to fight for working families, that is somehow the definition of fascism. That's Nazi. Again, it's clearly not, but it's interesting. Doesn't that remind you of right-wing Zionists? Right? ContraPoints. China-Saudi relationship. ContraPoints has this whole video, how to spot a fascist. And it's all about how all kinds of people on the internet, basically all Republicans are secretly Nazis. And you can tell because they have like secret coded hand signs and they use the wrong Twitter emoji and that there's this elaborate, vast, secret Nazi white nationalist conspiracy inside the U.S. government, and that there's this vast, like, Nazi plot. Doesn't that sound a lot like right-wing Zionists? And so it raises the question, there's some kind of relationship between the bread tube argument that everyone who disagrees with them is a Nazi, and the right-wing Zionist argument that everyone who disagrees with Israel is secretly a Nazi. It's the same kind of thinking. BreadTube generally is critical of Israel. But you have to wonder, is that performative? Because they have the same mindset. It's the same logic, right? That that deep down millions of people are actually Nazis, that there's this vast conspiracy against Jewish people, and that there's this vast, and that we need to be constantly exposing people who support China because they're secretly Nazis. And it's like that mindset, and the mindset of right-wing Zionists who think from the river to the sea means kill all Jews, they're pretty much, it's the same logic, right? With right-wing Zionists, it translates to supporting Israel and Israeli foreign policy. With BreadTube, it's not about Israel, it's about canceling tankies and all leftists who don't immediately jump on board with them. But it's the same mindset. It's the same belief that somehow there is this, this vast, secret, hidden plot, and it's a little interesting, isn't it? A little interesting. Very, very interesting. History different. If Wallace, not Truman. Very interesting. And you have to wonder, China, Russia, relations, Israel. You have to wonder. It's pretty weird. So right-wing Zionists annoy me, and I'm really glad to see there's such an awakening of people opposing Israel's crimes. Really glad to see there are so many Jewish people who are stepping up and saying that what Israel does doesn't represent us, it doesn't represent our people, and I'm really glad to see that. Because at the end of the day, anti-Semitism, this notion that one group secretly controls the world and some evil, we got to reject that. That's brutal. That's racism. That leads to all kinds of pogroms and hate. And obviously the Holocaust is the most extreme example of that. So we have no need for anti-Semitism. And anti-Semites are dumb too. They're not just dumb too. I think there's a quote, August Bebel said, anti-Semitism is socialism for fools. Those who are not smart enough to understand like capitalism and profits and economics say, oh, there's one group who has all the money and they're a bunch of Jews. It's like, it's just this dumb, it's dumb. It is primitive, very, very primitive feelings of class consciousness. They can't comprehend economics, but they can understand that somebody in another ethnic group might have it better than they do. And it's awful. It's just awful. And so we reject anti-Semitism. We do. And bigotry of any kind, right? Bigotry against any religion, bigotry against any race is not acceptable. Civilized human beings don't engage in any form of ethnic or racial bigotry. They just don't. I don't know who that person is, Shoga. I just don't know who that is, so I can't answer that. But, we can be critical of a political movement called Zionism. And, as I have said many times, the majority of Zionists in the United States are not Jews. The majority of Zionists in the United States are Christians. Right? There are far more Christian Zionists in America than there are Jewish Zionists in America. So criticizing Zionism is not an ethnic attack on Jewish people. And many of the strongest and most outspoken critics of Israel in the United States, like Noam Chomsky, like Norman Finkelstein, are themselves Jewish. So, you can talk about Leslie Feinberg, and, the first prominent trans activist in the United States, who was also vehemently anti-Israel. Went to Palestine and met with Hamas, and met with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and met with actually went and as a Jew went to Gaza and met with armed Palestinian resistance. That's how much of an anti-Zionist and anti-imperialist Jewish person she was. So So you just have to understand that that we don't want to engage in medieval bigotry and primitive barbaric thinking of any kind. Zionism is primitive barbaric thinking, as I've just described. Anti-Semitism is also primitive barbaric thinking, and we reject that. Right? We can talk about Israel. We can talk about Israel and its ties to imperialism, its ties to neoliberal economics and such. But at the end of the day, we're not speaking in racial terms here. The reason we are so critical of Israel is because of the fact that we reject speaking in racial terms. We reject speaking in terms of one race is better than another race, and we don't talk that way. Civilized people don't engage in that kind of thinking. We think beyond that, and so we must reject anti-Semitism as much as we reject Zionism. And in fact, if you want to get really into this, anti Semitism and Zionism walk hand in hand. If you read Theodore Herzl's writings, Theodore Herzl argued that anti Semitism was natural on the part of non Jews in Europe, and that anti Semitism would always be the reality, and that's why it was necessary to create Israel. And if you read it, Theodore Herzl actually repeated a lot of anti-Semitic tropes that were used by anti-Semites, and no one talks about that. Theodore Herzl, the founder of the World Zionist Organization, he was very much of the opinion that anti-Semitism should not be fought against and should be expected, and that it was the Marxists who fought against anti-Semitism. It was Marxists who said the problem is not some Jewish conspiracy, the problem is capitalism. It was the Marxists who said workers who are Jewish and workers who are Christian and workers that are Catholic and workers that are Protestant and workers that are atheists all have the same destiny as part of the working class. It was Vladimir Lenin who said that Zionism is a reactionary trend of the Jewish petty bourgeoisie. It was the Bolsheviks that rejected Bundism and said that the Jewish people in Russia should join the Bolshevik Party, not have a separate organization, and that you shouldn't have separate organizations within, the Russian left, and that they should be organized into one party. It was, and I'll just go right into it now. It was the Soviet Union that created the Jewish autonomous region in the Soviet Union and gave a homeland to Jewish people in the Soviet Union. And to this day, the world's largest menorah is located in Russia, not in Israel. And that there was a Jewish homeland created in the Soviet Union. And that the Soviet Union ultimately liberated liberated the concentration camps. It was Soviet troops that tore down the walls of Auschwitz concentration camp. It was communists who mobilized against fascism and built a popular front to fight fascism. So everything that I don't know, what point am I making? I mean, this notion that Zionism is the response to anti-Semitism is wrong. The response to anti-Semitism, the response to all forms of racism, is socialism and class struggle and workers' power. That is the response. Well, should the U.S. government be more centralized? All right, U.S. government more centralized. States' rights. All right. So that needs to be said as well. So, I'm glad to see so many people taking to the streets and protesting Israel's crimes. I'm glad to see that the world seems to be, far more awakened to the crimes of Israel and the need for, standing with the Palestinians, Israeli nukes. I'm glad that people are opposing Israel's crimes. So there you go. And look, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to take this opening segment that I just said, and they're going to say that, what Caleb said about right-wing Zionists, he said all Jews say that, which I explicitly did not say. I explicitly did not say that all Jews feel this way. Some Jews are anti-Israel. There's a lot of anti-Israel Jews. There's a lot of liberal Zionists who have a different approach. And I'm referring specifically to Netanyahu right-wing Zionists who I have encountered in New York City and heard endlessly from. I remember I used to be on the subway. I remember one time I was on the subway, I tried to sell a socialist newspaper to a woman, and she said, I'm not interested. She said, I come from a country that's being destroyed by socialism. And I said, what country is that? And she said, Israel. We give all of our people, we give them free health care, and we give them free food, and instead we need to be spending money on our weapons and our bombs. Okay. I mean, newspaper sales were not for her. I was not going to sell her a communist newspaper. Um, but that was her argument, was that she felt that Israel was too socialist, and that they need to be spending more money on their military. Yeah, and also interestingly, I had the opportunity of interviewing Rabbi Weiss. Now, Rabbi Weiss, he is a Hasidic, Jew who is so anti-Israel that he like goes to Iran and speaks at conferences, and that there is a group of Hasidic Jews that are so opposed to Israel, that they are like fanatical supporters of Iran, and fanatical supporters of the Palestinian resistance, and they are certainly a small minority among Orthodox Hasidic Jews, but they exist, and those folks certainly exist. And you will see them. They will protest outside the UN against Israel, and they will say, boycott Israel. In fact, I went to a press conference outside the UN. Naturi Karta is their name. And I went to a protest outside the UN one day where one of them burned his Israeli passport. And he gave an interview, and he said, according to the Torah, I have to burn it in order, with God's law, Israel cannot exist until the Messiah comes. And so in order to fulfill my religion, I have to burn my passport, and I don't have another passport. He said, I will be stateless after I burn this passport. And so, he burned his passport. He burned his Israeli passport, and then he and the other Hasidic Jews, they joined arms, and they did like a dance, like a celebratory dance around his burned passport, to celebrate that he had burned his passport, in order to fulfill his religious principles. Now, Rabbi Weiss and others, they argue that Israel is a huge violation of the Jewish religion. So there you go. I mean, New York City, Israel-Palestine stuff is really a big deal. I mean, you cannot escape it here in New York. And I mean, today, I live in this neighborhood, and I couldn't escape it. The helicopters, the fireworks, the protests, I don't go to protests anymore, but there you go. Socialist nations. All right. Socialist nations deal with ongoing genocide, Yemen, Gaza. So there you go. Jimmy Hoffa. That's a good question. Jimmy Hoffa. Just writing down the super chats. So that is the first thing that I wanted to talk about. Now, while Palestinians are dying, while Israel is attacking Gaza, while all these ferocious things are coughing, U.S. mainstream media has decided to talk about something so important, vitally important. I mean, it's just so important. I mean, it's just so important. It is exactly what we need to be focused on. If you turned on CNN yesterday, you would be seeing for hours and hours and hours the most important thing in our politics. I mean, vitally important. I mean, nothing in the world, not Israel, Palestine, not Yemen, not, the Iran nuclear deal, none of that is important in comparison to what I'm about to reference. Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC don't like each other, and they work in the same office building. Oh man, I mean, it is. Oh man, I mean, wow. The two Congress women are fighting with each other, and it is. Oh my goodness, it is vitally important. I mean, this is what we need to be focused on as a country. We need to focus on the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene, before she was in Congress, she went to AOC's office and stuck her head in the mail slot and yelled some nasty stuff at AOC. that she screamed at AOC, and I mean, they're fighting. And these two people who work together, who have vehemently different political views, vehemently different parts of the country, vehemently different backgrounds, God forbid, you'd be surprised, they don't get along with each other for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know why a strong Trump supporter and a DSA member might not get along with each other. I don't know why a middle-aged lady from the South and late 20s Puerto Rican girl from the Bronx. I don't know why they would possibly not agree on everything. But Erdogan's recent threats. I guess they don't like each other. I mean, one is a socialist, one is a libertarian right-wing gun nut, it's really important. It's really important, really, 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 really important that Marjorie Taylor Greene yelled at AOC. AOC has yelled back at Marjorie Taylor Greene. And, oh man, it is just, this is the most important story ever. Two members of Congress who are female are not getting along with each other. This is, wow. Did you ever watch Dawson's Creek? Did you ever watch Beverly Hills 90210? This is really, really important stuff. This is really, really, really important stuff. Like this is really important stuff that there are two members of Congress who don't agree with each other, and that this is what we need to focus on as a country. This is the big issue. Now, I'm wondering if in the next season, like Marjorie Taylor Greene will find out that AOC is not actually sleeping with her boyfriend, and then they'll become best friends, and they'll like pull a nasty prank on Ilhan Omar. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm really hoping that next season they become best pals and they team up against Ilhan Omar. That'll be epic. That'll be just epic. I've got my popcorn here. I'm excited. Of course, I'm being sarcastic here. I again, breathe, calm down, try not to be too much of a jerk, Caleb. But it's like, okay, all right. Really, like, okay. Marjorie Taylor Greene, not a nice person. All right, let's just be real, right? Everyone she doesn't like is a communist. They're kind of take our guns away, and she's, laser beams from space, and yeah, she's one of those. And she's a huge supporter of Israel, mind you. She's huge supporter of Israel and terrorists. And she says AOC supports terrorists because she supports Black Lives Matter. And AOC supports Black Lives Matter, and actually, surprisingly, in the last couple of weeks, she's been very, very harshly critical of Israel. In the past, she said she was like a supporter of Israel, but she's flipped and flopped on that issue. But now she's speaking up, and she's more critical. I'll give her credit for that. She's generally let me down on almost every other international issue, like Venezuela or Bolivia or Russia, and especially since January 6th, she's really gone off the deep end. But she is criticizing Israel. But yeah, I'll tell you what annoys me the most about the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing. Okay? What annoys me the most about it is that Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing what Ben Shapiro did to AOC. And she's saying, why won't you debate me? Why won't you debate me? All right? And when Ben Shapiro said to AOC, why won't you debate me? AOC said, oh, why should I respond to someone who's catcalling me? Well, it's not catcalling. He didn't catcall her. He just asked her for a debate. And, of course, she's not even responding to Marjorie Taylor Greene when she asks for a debate. Like, now, obviously, I hate to be that guy, okay? I hate to do this, but we know why AOC is not going to debate Marjorie Taylor Greene. We know why AOC is not going to debate Ben Shapiro. Because she would lose, okay? I'm sorry. Have you watched an AOC speech before? She would lose. She would lose. Come on, she would lose. You know that, right? There are many socialists in New York City who could very effectively debate Marjorie Taylor Greene or Ben Shapiro. But the game is rigged to make sure they never get into Congress. AOC, on the other hand, is there because she is what the ID poll left wants. Look, the left has basically decided that they don't want ideology, they don't want facts, they don't want history. Look, there are many Latino activists in New York City that are ideological as hell, Marxist, Leninist, have studied the history. That ain't AOC. There are many Puerto Rican folks. The Puerto Rican movement in New York City is huge. It's huge, right? I mean, there's a guy in city council, Udanis Rodriguez, and when he's just kind of a regular Democrat. But when he first got elected to the New York City Council, he was very much seen as an ally of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and the Puerto Rican independence movement. There are lots of very, very ideological activist leftists in New York City who could kick Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ben Shapiro down Main Street, but they will never get into Congress. Never. They will never get into Congress. Never. But AOC, it's my swag bag. That's who we get. Why is she there? Because she can't. She's a safe socialist, right? She thinks socialism is when everyone gets free health care and, you've read the interviews. Oh, Lordy. She's there because she couldn't debate Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's there because she couldn't debate Ben Shapiro. She's there because we've decided as a movement, Lynn Begow and Third Worldism, she's there because we decided as a movement, none of that matters, right? What matters is ID poll. What matters is calling people racist and sexist and homophobic. And so all Ben Shapiro would have to do to win the debate, all Marjorie Taylor Greene would have to do to win the debate is say, Stalin killed a gajillion people. Socialism's never worked anywhere it's ever been tried. Look, I started a small business. That's capitalism. What was AOC say? You're racist. Oh, okay. Yeah, it would look bad. It would be bad. Reds. All right, we'll talk about Reds. I've talked about that before, but we'll talk about it. Yeah, so, we know that. And this is a problem the left has. We need to break with ID poll. We need to break with the wokeness. We need to break with that. But so those are my two thoughts. I think that the girl fight on Capitol Hill is a waste of time. It's made for TV, and it's not entertaining, number one. I also think that we know why AOC won't debate MGT and won't debate Ben Shapiro, and it's because the left has made a decision that that facts and information and ideology isn't important. And, AOC rose to prominence not because she could talk about those things, because the left as a movement, the synthetic left, doesn't care about that stuff. Right? I talk about that, and that makes me a Nazi. Apparently, I'm a crypto-Nazi because I talk about workers controlling the means of production and centrally planned economies. I don't just sit on here and call people racist all day. As a movement, the left has decided that what it wants is everyone to be called racist, everyone to be called sexist, and that's, and this ID poll and who's the most oppressed and, actual ideology, actual facts, that's not important, right? We just, no, that's not important, Well, the Black Panthers thought it was important, the Communist Party of the 1930s that, had a huge amount of influence. They thought it was important. The revolutionaries around the world that have fought imperialism, they thought it was important. But, we have decided that what's important is, who we can, and that's, so we got AOC. She is a product of the decisions that have been made. The synthetic left values some things and not others. And she is a product of the decisions that the left has made. And so there you go. So that's the second thing that is pissing me off. Wow, we're almost an hour in here. Third thing that is pissing me off. Anarcho-teenagers on the internet. Okay, anarchists, right? Brent Langel is an anarchist. I respect him. He respects me. He vehemently disagrees with me on many issues. I vehemently disagree with him on many issues. But I respect him. He's a smart guy. He's studied. He's writing comic books, and he's a great guy. I worked with him on Cecily McMillan's defense, when she was facing serious criminal charges, and there are many anarchists that I respect, that are smart people, that know a lot, that disagree with me. I disagree with them, but they're smart, intelligent human beings, and you can engage with them and have a productive conversation. The internet is full of anarchist teenagers who are obnoxious human beings. They are obnoxious human beings. For example, I have long said the slogan abolish the police, abolish prisons, abolish borders is not a strategic slogan because to average people, it sounds insane. It sounds insane. If you say to average people, random person on the street, hey, we want to abolish the police, they go, aha, so it's midnight and someone's breaking into my apartment. What do I do? You know, abolish the police is not, you say to average people, no borders. And they say, oh, okay, so every terrorist and murderer should just be able to walk right over. We shouldn't even have customs to like screen them. Should we even have passports? I mean, just no borders, right? Just nothing there between Canada and the United States. Nothing there between Mexico. Do you think that's sensible? If you say to people, no prisons, okay, so some guy like rapes and murders 12 women, and we just say, don't do that again, buddy. Don't do that again. These people are like average Americans. If you say to them, abolish the police, abolish prisons, abolish, open borders now, they think you're nuts. And I have long stated that I agree with the sentiment behind the people that say these things. When people say abolish the police, what they mean is, in the process of building socialism, we need to build new institutions and new entities that serve working class power. We need to dismantle the old state apparatus in order to, create new institutions, right? Like they did in the Paris Commune, like they did in Russia and the Bolshevik Revolution, that yes, we need to dismantle the old state apparatus and build a new state apparatus. In Venezuela, they completely changed the military. They completely changed the policing institutions as they were moving towards socialism. And you have to do that. Yes, that's what they mean by abolish the police. But if you just say, get rid of the police, people go, what? It's not a good slogan. Most people can't understand it. Same with prisons. I would like us to move to a society with no prisons, right? A society where it is not necessary to lock up anyone, right? A society where there's abundance and prosperity and the kind of problems that give birth to rapists and murderers and child molesters, and those things don't exist, and the need for prisons and courts fades away. The ultimate goal of communism, I'm for it, right? And the same with borders, right? Ultimately, we get to a world of vast material abundance where there's so much prosperity. The need for dividing the world into countries fades away. Again, I understand what Marxists understand what that means. Average people don't know what that means. If you say to average people what those things are, they look at you like you're crazy, right? So I have long said, going around saying abolish the police, abolish prisons, open borders now is not strategic for the left. Now, there was somebody else, a woman, who was saying the exact same thing that I said. And she said it in particular in regard to, the issue of rapists and sex offenders, right? And that as a woman, she's not comfortable saying abolish prisons and letting all the rapists and child molesters and, sexual assault people, she's not comfortable with that. Oh my goodness. All of these teenagers, all of these little teenagers got on there, and it's like unbelievable. These kids really, it's like it doesn't occur to them that you need to explain this to average people. It doesn't occur to them that average people might be put off by these slogans. But if you just dare say everything that I just said, you're a Nazi. Well, it's proof you're a Nazi, right? You're a Nazi, right? I don't want police. I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. You listen to them. These are like, it's like the idea that you might have to like think out a policy before you propose it doesn't occur to them. They're just doing this adolescent thing. They don't like police because police tell people what to do. And, and I must be a Nazi because I disagree with them. And this woman who said this, she must be a Nazi and we're all Nazis. And these anarchist teenagers, right? Someone says, don't attack our own side. These people are not our own side. People that think I'm a Nazi because I support China are not on my side. People who call for violence against me and are trying to, get me doxxed, and are trying to, threaten me and cause me serious harm, they're not on my side, right? I'm sorry. I mean, the people who have gone out of their way to smear me and can't tell the difference between me and a white supremacist are not my comrades, okay? And they're not anarchists. These are scum. This is just scum. These people are human garbage, all right? They are human garbage, right? If because I don't say abolish the police, I must be a Nazi, even though I've explained that I agree with the sentiments, but I want an actual policy that can communicate it. If that means I must be a Nazi, right? These people are scum. And no, I don't. They don't deserve a pass. I'm tired of people giving these people a pass. The Antifa kids on the internet, that think that everyone who disagrees with them about a very, very, very specific interpretation of the trans issue, not people that are critical of transphobia. No. If you don't agree with a very specific interpretation of the trans issue, you're a murderer. You're killing me with your words. These people, right? I'm sorry, they're not my comrades, and it's not acceptable, right? I mean, these people that it's like if somebody posts a video of me talking about why the Black Panthers in the 1970s were great, you'll post that video on a web forum, and then immediately below it, some like 13-year-old will go, "This guy is actually a Nazi because this person in Russia that I've never heard of, who is this person in Russia that I've never heard of, he sat next to, and I saw this in the video, and so you should know that he's actually the leader of the Ku Klux Klan." I mean, these people are vile scum, okay? They are vile scum, right? I'm sorry. I'm tired of people giving them a pass. I mean, they have launched endless harassment against me, endless harassment. I mean, they're going after David Rovics right now, these scum are. Did you know this? David Rovics, one of the most amazing anarchist folk singers out there. I mean, just amazing anarchist folk singer, has a song for the St. Patrick's Battalion and a song that when the last Abraham Lincoln veteran died. They're going after him. And they've put up flyers in his neighborhood saying that he's a Holocaust denier with his face and his address on it. These people are scum. They're vile scum, okay? They are. These people are vicious people, right? You either agree with Joe Biden, vote for Joe Biden, and denounce every socialist country, and if you don't do that, you're the equivalent of a Nazi, and they call for violence against you. They try to get you fired from your job. They try to destroy your life. They equate you with Nazis, right? It can't be you're just wrong, right? I disagree with you. You disagree with me. You disagree with that. No. You're a Nazi if you disagree with them. Immediately, everyone is a de facto Nazi for disagreeing with them. And therefore, all kinds of vicious, sadistic cruelty is justified. They lie. They take quotes out of context. Thank you, Space Communist. They intentionally take clips of things saying things that you didn't say. They invent ways that you could get on there and you could say the sky is blue. You could say the sky is blue, and they would be like, well, blue was the color of one of the Nazi uniforms in 1933, and while he said the sky is blue, he got this twinge in his eyes, so therefore, by saying the sky is blue, we know that Caleb is secretly the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And they do this, and they live in this little universe where it's okay to treat people like this. It's somehow okay to treat people like this. It's not okay to treat people like this. No, I don't forgive these people. These people are not my comrades. They're not in the movement. They're cyber bullies. They're human garbage, okay? And, you can be an anarchist all you want. That's fine. You can be a Trotskyist. You can be a whatever. I can disagree with you. You can disagree with me. But when you start this game where everyone's a Nazi and violence against everyone is okay, and you'll notice that they never go after people who are pro-imperialist. Have you ever noticed that? Never do they go after people who are pro-imperialist. This doesn't apply to people that are pro-imperialist. If my position on China changed tomorrow, my position on Russia changed tomorrow, if I immediately started doing what all of their favorite YouTube channels do and say, real socialism has never been tried, they would back off. It's about serving imperialism, right? And it all gets back to, they've revealed Alex Reed Ross, this so-called anarchist intellectual on the West Coast, right? who's working with the Network Contagion Institute. It has all kinds of former FBI and former CIA and former NYPD and members of Congress working on it, and it's sponsored by this, the Open Society Institute of George Soros and the Anti-Defamation League. This is an operation. This is a government operation. I mean, this is clearly like, and they go after, who do they go after? They go after me. They go after Ben Norton. They go after Max Blumenthal, and it's there's this whole document, the Red Brown Alliance, that's got like every person on the left that's ever spoken up about Syria. It somehow like tries to like make them something and connect them to something. This is an operation, and these dumb like 12-year-old kids who feel like they're heroes because they can go along with this. Um, they feel like they're so special, like they're experts. Well, I know all about Max Blumenthal. I read about him in this article, and so I'm like an expert, and he's actually a Nazi, even though he's been on the left his whole life. He's actually a Nazi. It's like you're not special because you can do this. You're not special because you can go after somebody. You're not special because you can hang up flyers in David Rovick's neighborhood. These people are human garbage and they're scum. There's nothing heroic about doing this, There's nothing heroic about doing this, Back in the age of Dr. Martin Luther King, there were these racist white people who didn't like Dr. Martin Luther King because he was standing up to the status quo. So they would assemble when the civil rights marches were happening, and they would throw feces at Dr. Martin Luther King. Yeah? That's how history is going to remember these people. No. Did they stand up against U.S. foreign policy? No. Did they question the way that things were in the United States? No. They threw feces at the people who did. That's how these people will be remembered. That is how these people will be remembered. That's what they are. They are the modern day equivalent of the people who threw feces at Dr. Martin Luther King. And that's how they're going to be remembered. When their empire was going around murdering people, did they stand up to the empire? No. Did they question U.S. imperialism and its crimes? No. They spread lies and engaged in character assassination, personal attacks against the people who actually did. You know, you know, well, I don't want to get into that. Anyway, why do people tend to shun the complexity and nuance? Right. Very, very good point. Shun complexity and nuance. Right? Why don't we denounce the anarchist imperialist alliance? That's a good way of putting it. But historically, anarchism is better than this. Historically, anarchism is better than this, right? This is not representative of anarchism. There are a lot of great anarchists who would never stand for this kind of garbage. So, and thank you, Wandering Left, for your super chat. It's much appreciated. But these teenage anarchists, and on the trans issue, right? I know many trans people. I am friends with many trans people, and I love these trans people. They are my friends, and I want them to be respected. And I want them to be treated with respect. I want them to be treated as they want to be treated. I want them to be given love and kindness. I don't want them to experience discrimination. I don't want them to experience rejection from their family. I don't want them to experience, discrimination in hiring. I deeply love many trans people. In the past few months in particular, I've become close to a number of trans people. There are trans people that are in my life that I care about. They are good people, and I love them as comrades, and I want what is best for them and what they feel is best for them, and I have nothing but kindness and affection, right? And I'm very offended by people that don't seem to understand how hard it is for trans people. Look, there are a lot of people who don't get that. They just don't get that trans people get randomly murdered on the street all the time. They don't get that. They don't get that the trans people's their parents won't speak to them sometimes. They don't get that. And that there's this insensitivity to how hard it is. What these trans people endure. There's a harsh insensitivity, and I don't like it. I think people need to recognize how hard it is to be a trans person, and I'm very bothered when people don't recognize that. So I consider myself to be an ally of trans people, but I don't know what trans at the end of the day really means. I just don't. And so I don't say what it means because I don't know. And I know that there are trans people who vehemently disagree with other trans people about what it means. So I don't get into that. right? And I know that look, ContraPoints has her view, and many trans people vehemently hate ContraPoints because of her view. Well, I'm not trans, so the last thing I should be doing is speaking up and trying to tell trans people what it means to be trans. Okay, if I was, if it is not my job, right? You know, it is not my job to get up and tell these people what it means to be trans, how they should act as trans people. I don't go there because I don't know enough about it, and I don't want to know enough about it. Right? If I started to get into that world, I would start to develop opinions about these things, about what it means to be trans, what it doesn't mean, and what gender actually. And if I got into that world, I would develop opinions about it, and those opinions would make me the enemies of a big chunk of trans people. And so I just don't go there. I don't go there. And I just don't want to go there. I want to operate from the basis of trans people have rights, trans people should be respected, trans people should be loved, should be welcomed as comrades, should never be made to feel alone. That's what I can give you, okay? That's what I can give you. I can give you love and comradely respect and a feeling that people need to recognize the hardship that you go through, that you need to be protected from the horrors of this society and the way they treat you. That's what I can give you. But as far as agreeing with your particular interpretation of what trans means, I can't do it. I can't do it. As far as fighting with other trans people about what it means to be trans, I really can't do that. I can't do that. And if you want me to do that, you're talking to the wrong guy. I can't do that. I cannot do that. I can't do that. And if you think that makes me transphobic, I don't know what to tell you, because there are some things I can do, which is care about people and want people to be respected. And there are some things I cannot do, like get into big internal fights about what trans means. I don't know what trans means. I just know there are people who are trans that I deeply care about, and they deserve respect. And that's it. That's all I can do. And I also know that people aren't going to agree. People aren't going to agree with me and what I just said. Okay, look, there's going to be disagreements at the end of the day, and that's really all I can say about that. So, I don't appreciate, I guess, the demand that every left-wing space immediately turn into a very heated debate about the very specific issues about trans people, right? There's this demand that left-wing spaces all turn into a vehement, where we talk about nothing but that, and we take very specific positions on it, and then we expel and condemn everyone who doesn't agree with our very specific. I'm not going to do that. That's not why I created the Center for Political Innovation, right? Look, if someone's transphobic and and if their religion or their background says that they don't agree with trans people, well, I will work with them, right? I'm not going to work with them on transphobia, but I will talk to them, and I will allow them to work with me in trying to promote socialism. And as much as I will disagree with them about that, as much as I will try to maybe gently get them to have empathy and have the kindness that would have people sympathize with trans people more, at the end of the day, look, I am for a woman's right to choose when it comes to abortion. I think abortion should not be outlawed. But, if you're a Muslim, you're going to strongly feel that abortion should be outlawed. If you're a Christian, if you're Roman Catholic, you're going to feel that way. And you're welcome to work with me. I will work with you, even if you feel that way, right? Because that shouldn't be the dividing line. Socialism needs to get out of the movement and get to the masses. And we got to get over this demand that everybody jump on board around issues that's not going to happen, right? That these things, it doesn't work that way. There's going to be a divergence of opinion and views, and we need to get to average Americans who may not be ready who may not be ready to swallow everything. Look, if you don't like the Soviet Union, that's fine, right? I mean, there are different disagreements. I mean, there are people who vehemently disagree with me about modern China and stuff. Again, it's about building connections. It's not about this endless social media battle where everyone who disagrees with me is wrong and I'm right. And it's not about that. We're trying to actually build something. We're trying to build something in the real world. We're trying to actually get out of the nightmare we're facing. And that means learning to get along with people with whom you disagree. Oh, goodness. Okay, you mentioned Nazi Germany's economics. Make a parallel with... Ah, man. All right. Okay, Italy, and Japan economics. All right. And what other super chats did I miss here? What other super... carry water up the hill. Carry water up the hill. Before the... I don't know what that means, Jacrass. Keep you doing, Caleb. Well, thank you. Thank you. I don't know what that means, but, I'm happy to keep doing it. 2010, I was saying we need to listen to the concerns of Tea Party folks over issues. Oh, okay. Well, we'll talk about that. Tea Party. All right. We'll talk about that. Did I miss any other super chats? Did I miss any others here? Don't want to miss any super chats. All right. Okay. So now we can talk about the less contentious thing I was going to talk about. All right. The fourth topic I was going to talk about in my opening remarks. Oh, which super chat did I miss? I wrote them down. Which one did I miss? I missed one. Which one was it? What did I miss? Because I saw the Tea Party. I saw carry water up the hill. I saw the economics of Japan. I saw... Which one did I miss? I'm looking. I don't see any other ones here now. Which one did I miss? I'm going back up. I don't want to miss any super chats. I want you to give me an answer if you... Alrighty. I'm wandering left. I don't see a super chat I missed. I think I got them all. Don't fake me out like that now. You got them all, Caleb, says Harold. All right, very good. All right. So now the issue... I don't know who Adolf Reed is. I just don't know who that is. All right. Now, the issue that I wanted to talk about that is less... It's funny. You would think that of all the things I'm about to say tonight, this actually, if one is like an orthodox Marxist, this is probably going to be the most controversial thing I would say tonight. But actually, compared to everything I just said tonight, all the negativity and the issues I've talked about tonight, this is actually probably of least, I don't know, what do they call that? Of least, hardliners winning in Iran. Oh, we'll talk about that. Yeah, I got plenty to say about that. Ahmadinejad may be running, apparently. Hardliners running in Iran. Win. We'll definitely talk about that. All right. Last thing I was going to talk about. So, as I told you all about a year ago, I'm in the process of publishing a Center for Political Innovation edition of Frederick Engels' very important book, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. And I've been working on this quite a while. The reason it's taking me a while is because of the fact that I felt, I need to write a good introduction, like with the Green Book. We put out the Green Book by Gaddafi, very successful. So the next one we want to do is Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. The next reprint. And Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Frederick Engels is it's compiled. It's a much shorter version of a much bigger book called Anti-During. Okay? Many people don't know this, but there's a much longer book called Anti-During. And they basically cut it down and watered it down into Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, which is considered probably one of the most important pamphlets in the history of Marxism. It's Frederick Engels. It's 3 chapters explaining what Marx's theories were and why Marx's scientific socialism was different than the utopian socialism that came before it. And the first chapter is about utopian socialism and the origins of capitalism. Second chapter is about dialectics and dialectical materialism. And the final chapter is about historical materialism and the struggle for socialism. But in order to write a good introduction, I had to go read Anti-During which is the much longer version of the work, which is a critique of the philosophy of a German socialist who was around at the time named Düring, Eugen Düring, right? In German, the German version, right? You know how names in different languages have different versions. The German version of Eugene, I believe, is pronounced Eugen. And so there was this professor in Germany named Eugen Düring. And Eugen Düring was a socialist, but he had socialist views that were very, very, very different than Eugen, right? Thank you, Chaya. Eugen Düring. And Eugen Düring, his view of socialism was very, very, very different than Marx's view of socialism. And so Friedrich Engels wrote Anti-Düring, which was a response explaining how Marx's scientific socialism was different than the mystical, religious, spiritualist socialism of Düring. Düring was an idealist, and Marx was a materialist. And here's the thing. The primary disagreement between Düring and Marx was not really, in its essence, the disagreement was this. Düring was a follower of the economist Friedrich List. Friedrich List was a German economist who developed a critique of capitalism that was based on the concept of a harmony of interests, right? And that, Eugen Düring and Friedrich List said that socialism would come to Germany on the basis of the government balancing a harmony of interests for the good of the country. That there was, that there's the workers, there's the capitalists, there's the farmers, there's the teachers, there's the children, there's the parents, there's the old folks, that they all, that the government's job was to control the economy to work in the interest of everyone, a balance of interests. Whereas Marx said that socialism would come to Germany on the basis of class struggle, of the working class fighting against the capitalist class. It wasn't about a harmony of interests. It was rather about the interests of one class defeating the interests of another class. That was the primary disagreement. Now, obviously, Eugen Düring, while he was not, I believe he was not a Christian, he rejected Christianity, but he was like spiritually motivated. He thought thinking makes it so, and so he rejected materialism. Marx is all about materialism and dialectics. But that was the primary disagreement between them. Harmony of interests versus class struggle. And Düring was also an anti-Semite, which is important, right? Friedrich List, who was his mentor, rejected anti-Semitism. Düring himself was anti-Semitic. So, in Germany, there's this college professor. He was blind, I believe. There's this blind college professor who is a socialist, who says that socialism will come into existence on the basis of a harmony of interests. Friedrich Engels says, "Oh no, socialism will come into existence on the basis of classes fighting against each other." And the thing is that if you look at what modern socialism believes, if you listen to what's being said by China, if you listen to what's being said by Venezuela, if you listen to what's being said by Cuba, listen to what's being said by Vietnam, there's an element of, you can hear Düring. In a lot of ways, socialist governments in our time very much balance a harmony of interests. The Chinese government, if you read their statements, if you look at the way they govern, they don't sit there and go, "We are enabling the Chinese working class to destroy the capitalists of China, destroy the farmers of China." They don't do that. The Chinese government, very much, it's a proletarian government. It's from a proletarian party, the Communist Party. But the way they govern is, you can see an influence of Düring and List. And the same with Cuba. If you read Grandma, the Cuban publication, again, it's not, the industrial workers of Cuba will just, no, it's very much, we're a proletarian party. The proletariat is the greatest class. We are but the way they talk is they speak on behalf of all of Cuban society. And they're, having read Anti-Düring, I realized that, and having, criticized the synthetic left and criticized especially the cancel culture atmosphere in the USA and the revolutionary intelligentsia, that 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 there is a little bit of, I've talked about Marx and how Marx was rooted in that European revolutionary intelligentsia, that coming out of the French Revolution, there was a disagreement, right? There was people that thought the French Revolution didn't go far enough, but there was that revolutionary energy, the releasing of impulses. And that honestly, I realized that I feel like, as much as I'm far more familiar with the Marxist tradition, I don't think that they were 100% correct in their disagreement with Friedrich List and their disagreement with Düring. That to some degree or other, the socialist revolutions of the 20th century very much were countries breaking free from imperialism, and it was the communists, the proletariat as a class, leading a coalition that fought for a harmony of interests for the whole nation. Right? I mean, the Chinese Communist Party fought to create a new China. They lead a new China, and that new China has capitalists in it, and it has workers in it, and it has peasants in it, and it has, middle class people in it, and and if you look at socialism, the way socialism has emerged, you can see elements of a harmony of interests, and thank you, Andy. You can see elements of a harmony of interests there. So, at the same time, I'm not, and at this also a lot of the problems that the socialist movement has had is rooted in this explosive confrontational view that the way to solve problems is with clash and endless fighting. Look at the Cultural Revolution. That was a nightmare. Right? I mean, look at look at the struggle sessions and all. I mean, the Cultural Revolution, I mean, as bad as it was very much a fulfillment of this belief that, confrontation is the way to solve everything. There's, the proletarian line, and there are people who disagree. There's no harmony of interest. There is one class fighting another class. We'll be real. Some of the big problems that our movement has, and the cancel culture and all that flows from kind of that mindset that is rooted in the idea there could never be a harmony of interests, right? That there's just endless amounts of, confrontation and, and that honestly, when I write this introduction to Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, I'm going to talk about why this is the most important book in the history of Marxism, why it clearly rejects the notion that there are limits to growth, why it clearly, it shows that the problem with capitalism is the problem of overproduction and holding back growth. But I'm going to say, look, I'm going to have to talk about this polemic with Düring and this polemic with Friedrich List, and I'm going to have to talk about how a lot of the socialist countries around the world where a proletarian party is in power, with Marxist-Leninist ideology, a lot of the way they govern has echoes of Düring and List in it, right? That, yes, they took power in a revolution that was very confrontational, but that revolution was not, in Vietnam, the industrial working class in Vietnam at the time of the revolution was very small. The industrial working class in China at the time of the revolution was very, very small, right? They had proletarian ideology, but they fought for the whole nation. They fought for a harmony of interests of the whole nation. And that the way socialism has come into being, in many cases, has been on the basis of a harmony of interests, right? And that it's more complicated. And that honestly, as someone, I'm repeating myself, so I'll wrap up here. But as somebody who is critical of the synthetic left and critical of the European revolutionary intelligentsia and is very enthusiastic about socialism as it has come into the world in our time, I think that honestly, the debate between Marx and List and that debate needs to be reopened, right? And that there are some problems with the the overemphasis of the dialectical worldview. I mean, this view that every change always comes through confrontation. I mean, if that were the case, Twitter should be the most advanced place in the world, because all people do on Twitter is fight, fight, fight. And, Twitter should just be a factory of amazing new ideas. It should be the most advanced part of the universe, because people just get on there and scream and yell and fight, fight, fight. And obviously that's not the case, right? And that destruction in and of itself, confrontation in and of itself, doesn't necessarily lead to progress. And that is one of the problems with the dialectical and historical materialist worldview. I'll be honest, for the most part, I agree with the dialectical and historical materialist worldview, but to some degree or other, you have to construct, not just destruct. Ideas are very important. Ideas aren't just merely the reflection of material forces. They are the reflection of material forces, but there is also something to be said for ideas that, I've got questions about dialectical materialism, I'll be honest. And I'm one of the few internet Marxists who actually knows what dialectical materialism is. So as I said in my video, what is dialectical materialism? I'm telling you that there are some problems. I have some disagreement with the overall dialectical materialist worldview, and I will just be honest about that, right? I will just be straight up honest about it. So there you go. There you go, folks. That is my opening remarks. Now, was that a roller coaster? We talked about right-wing Zionists and how obnoxious they are. We talked about AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene. We talked about anarcho-teenagers and how obnoxious they are. We talked about trans rights and my position on that and how I feel. And then we talked about Marx versus Dühring and socialism, utopian, and scientific. And it's 91 minutes into this stream. And now we are ready to start answering the super chat questions. Wow, folks, what a night. What a night it is. I deeply love you all as my audience. You all are amazing. And you're not just my audience. You make these lives happen, okay? You make these lives happen. Thank you for everything you've done. Whew! All right. And now we will start doing our roll call. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Chicago, Sam Netton. Montreal, Chaya, good friend of the program. John in Houston. Henderson, Nevada. Cleveland, Pirate Alex. Bangor, Maine. Tristan from Maryland. Robert from Hawaii. Ryan in Oakland. San Jose. Nassau County, New York. Wisconsin. Nassau County, Char Darling, good friend of the show. Nashville, Kampuchea, Calgary, Canada. Jared in Virginia. Mississippi. California, Brazil, Kinky, good friend of the show. She's in love. Auckland, New Zealand. Michael Rostarucci in Ithaca, New York. Shout out to you, Michael. And you are a mod. Very good. Justin Wooten in Beijing, China. Very good to talk to you, Justin. Glad you're on board. Jared from the United Corporations of America. Los Angeles, West Palm Beach, Florida. Zach in San Antonio, Fairhope, Alabama. Oyo Hillary, Mexico, West Palm Beach. California, Joseph in Baltimore. Solidarity from Michigan. Israel, Rockland County, New York. Brazil, Los Angeles. Adelaide, Australia. West Palm Beach. Troy in Cincinnati, Kansas City, or in Kansas City, Missouri. Shulgi from California, West Palm Beach. Marta in Poland. Tony in Tasmania. Narnia. Alrighty. Temple City, California. Winnipeg, Portugal. Sao Paulo, Brazil. Detroit, Michigan. West Palm Beach. Allende, Mexico. Pomona, California. Missouri. Flushing, New York. Riverside, California. West Palm Beach. Tacoma. Dallas, Texas. Very good. Iran. South Korea. West Palm Beach. Palo, Round Mountain. Free Palestine. Greetings from Mesa, Arizona. Well, greetings to you, says Castor Allen. Lower East Side of New York City, says Jamal. Well, glad to have you here. Langley, Virginia, Bread Tube Headquarters, says Harold Sullivan. Ha ha ha. Northern Michigan, Free Palestine, Texas. Staten Island. Kieran from San Diego. Massachusetts Solidarity from the Bay State, says James Kane. Very good. Flushing, New York. Bergen, Norway. Comrade Wu in Beijing. Welcome, Comrade Wu. Good friend of the program. Good stuff. Good stuff. Branson, Missouri. Someone lives in hell. All right. Branson, Missouri. Inland Empire, California. Very, very good. Mi amigo, old gringo, says Juan Bermendez. Very, very good. Anyone else? Anyone else? Names and locations, and then we'll hammer out these super chats. We will hammer them out, and then we will be finished, and that will be our Saturday night stream. What a night. Riverside County, California. Steve Morris is here. Welcome. Glad you're here. Very, very good. Great stream so far, says Harold. Very good. Anybody else? Names and locations, names and locations. Names and locations. Woo! Names and locations. All right. Okay, folks, we'll start answering the super chat questions. All right. All right. Someone asked about unions and the low-wage police state, and is there government of action merch? Well, there you go. I would like to create some government of action merch. I would like to do that. So we should do that. As far as unions and the low-wage police state, well, look, they're trying to get rid of unions. I mean, the anti-union stuff is very vicious. Republicans are very anti-union. The Democrats, I guess, because the class, the contradiction with the Republicans has gotten so intense. The Democrats, what Joe Biden did at his speech where he talked about the PRO Act, that was big. But at the same time, we're not seeing unionization. New companies are not getting unionized. Really, the last big unionization victory in the United States was back when UPS was unionized by the Teamsters. That was huge. But that was the last big unionization. That's like the last big company that got fully unionized. At this point, most unions in the United States, disagreements with dialectical materialism. All right. At this point, most union workers in the United States are government employees. They are government employees at this point. And, the union movement is very weak. And I think the low-wage police state, part of that is making that the case. Unions are a democratizing force. The unions are definitely weaker than ever. And part of the reason they're weak is ideological, right? Is that at the end of the day, they're led by folks who don't really understand the class struggle, right? You talk about some of these communist unions in Greece. They don't wait for the government to conduct an election and give them an official, you are approved. They just start organizing, right? And that's the case. Communist unions around the world, they don't wait for like an official union election and a ballot. No, they just start organizing, and they shut down plants until they get what they want. Right? If you look at it, right? Around the world, unions that are led by communists, and thank you, Shaniqua, unions that are led by communists have an attitude that they don't need the government to approve them. They don't need they organize workers. They shut the plant down. They fight for the workers. They win over the workers by winning victories for them. You look at the Wobblies, the way they were strong. You look at William Z. Foster and how he shut down the country with the steelworkers strike. The strengths of unions is having an ideological class struggle outlook. And when unions have a class collaborationist, business unionist outlook, they're going to be weaker. There's an ideological problem in the union movement. The unions were purged of communists in the 1950s, and the labor bureaucracy is very, very pro-imperialist and in bed with the CIA, with the Solidarity House. And because of that, that fundamentally weakens the unions. The union bosses might think that helps them. They say, look, we're working with the CIA, and so maybe the government will like us more. Well, no, it doesn't help them, right? At the end of the day, it's that Marxist ideology that gave unions their strength. The class struggle viewpoint of the unions is what gave them their strength. The idea that they were going to fight for the interests of the people on the job, of their workers, and that's what gave them strength. So there you go. Is the Overton window real? Is the next super chat question. Well, the Overton window is this concept that, like, what people think. Sometimes, there's an opening and sometimes it closes. It refers to a real thing, right? That there is, public opinion, right? In some periods it is not subject to change, and in other periods it is, right? And that, so it's a real phenomenon that they are pointing toward. Look, in the 1950s, for example, gay rights in the United States. If you went around and talked to people about gay rights in the 1950s, you would get nowhere, right? Because at that point, the Overton window around gay rights was closed. But now, in our time, pretty much, I mean, aside from very, very right wing evangelicals, most Americans believe in gay marriage. So, the Overton window has opened, right? So what it's referring to is that sometimes things are up for debate, other times they're not. What they're referring to is real. I guess the issue is, the question is that the decisive force? Is it just this magical Overton window that opens and closes? That's the issue. And I think the issue is not so much, does public opinion change? Does the ability to change public opinion change? It's why does it change? All right. Okay, speaking of unions, what do you think of the Trumpka guy? All right, we'll talk about Trumpka. Okay, Trumpka. We'll talk about Trumpka. All righty. All right. Okay. Have I watched Ben Norton's two-part series on synthetic leftism? I haven't. I haven't seen it. But I'll check it out. I like Ben Norton. His tweets are great. He is fire. He does a lot of investigation. He's very anti-imperialist. I like him. I like his work. So there you go. Now, someone asked about, why is there rampant pedophilia on the right? Well, first of all, to be fair, that was the question. And I don't know that that's a fact. This is what the questioner asked. They said, why is there rampant pedophilia on the right? I don't know that's the true. I don't know, I have not conducted a study to find out the political views of pedophiles. So I don't know for a fact that pedophiles are on the right. But assuming that this questioner is correct, assuming that that is true, assuming that that's true, it is true. One thing, they talked about, why were there so many pedophile priests? Why was that? That people that have sexual urges that they are afraid of will often seek out atmospheres of sexual repression because they want to control that desire, right? That, priests in the Catholic Church are not supposed to ever have sex. So if you are somebody who has sexual desires that you're very afraid of and you want to control them, you might become a priest. And that's a very common tendency, right? That religious groups that are very restrictive of people's sexual behavior often have people in them that have sex drives they're very afraid of. When people are very afraid of their sexual desires, they will seek out atmospheres of sexual repression. People that might have an addiction to pornography, for example, will often join anti-pornography protest groups. People that are gay will often become very homophobic as they're trying to, deny their own homosexuality. And so, it's possible, assuming that this questioner is correct, that there is more pedophilia on the right. It could be due to the fact that the right is more socially conservative, and that people that are afraid of their own sexual desires, like if you're a pedophile, for goodness sakes, if your sexual desires are pedophilic, you're going to be very afraid of your desires because you know that acting them out is a crime and is a predatory, evil thing to do. You might be more attracted to socially conservative ideas, in a desire to constrain and to constrain your own desires. So maybe that's what it's about. But at the end of the day, I don't really know. One thing that I've noticed, though, is I would question this questioner's, concern. What is this? Amazon having mailbox union ballots, right? Mailbox union ballots. I would question that because it seems like the right, in a lot of ways, they're very afraid of pedophiles. Look at QAnon, right? It's this vast pedophile conspiracy, and the right seems to be, they seem to be more afraid of pedophiles. It's like the right, that's why they want more police state repression. There's a very good book called The Sex Panic, and it seems like, people on the right are more afraid of pedophiles than people on the left, right? The belief that pedophiles, there's a secret pedophile conspiracy, there's pedophile Satanists under every rock, that, that seems to be more of a right-wing thing. So I'm not sure, with this person's assessment that there's rampant pedophilia on the right. Now, someone in the chat said there's a lot of pedophilia in Hollywood. I believe that's possible. There you go. I just don't know. At the end of the day, I don't know. I mean, I have not studied pedophiles. I don't know what their political affiliations are. I don't know why they have those political affiliations. The person asked the question. I'm simply speculating as to why it might be, right? That it is true that people that have fear of their own sexual desires will seek out atmospheres of sexual repression. That's true. But then again, there's a lot of people on the right who don't seem to emphasize sexual repression. Libertarianism is a big thing on the right, and they're not into sexual repression. So, I mean, is it possible that more pedophiles are socially conservative because they want to control their own desires? Maybe. I don't know. At the end of the day, I really don't know. It's an interesting question. It's not something I had thought about. And it's certainly true that there's more obsessive fear of pedophiles on the right than on the left. So, what does that mean? Okay, enough about that. All right, where does Putin fit onto the political compass? Look, I don't think the political compass is legit. Okay, I don't think the political compass is legit. The political compass is a very Western way of looking at things, right? That there's socially liberal, and there's socially liberal, socially conservative, physically liberal, physically conservative, and everyone just fits in on there. It doesn't work that way, right? Across the world, there are a lot of different traditions. There are a lot of things that would be considered very, very liberal in the West that are considered quite conservative in the developing world. Politics is very different, and that Putin is Russian. Russia is a different country than the United States. Different history, different traditions, different worldview. And so to try and take that libertarian, the world's smallest political quiz and say, okay, Caleb, what score would you give Putin? I'm not going to do that, right? Russia economically is far to the left of the United States. National health care, government runs the oil business, government runs the energy sector, right? In terms of social conservatism, there is a lot of religion in Russia, right? I mean, Russia is a very religious country. The Russian Orthodox Church is the state religion, so you could argue that's conservative. But, it was an atheist country, right? The government promoted atheism, for 70 years. And, to think that atheism has just vanished since the fall of the Soviet Union, there's a big atheist influence. Now, though Russia has a state religion, for 70 years, they had a government that basically had an atheist, dialectical materialist worldview. So, and the Communist Party is a very big party, and Lenin is still in the mausoleum. So, it's complicated, and you can't do that. And again, there are things about Russia that we would think here are very conservative that they would think are very liberal, right? And that it's just again, the world doesn't fit into our Western view, right? It's kind of like how Americans, when they look at Tiananmen Square, they think it's Kent State, right? The Americans look at the 1989 events in China and Tiananmen Square, and they think it's Kent State. And it's not Kent State. What happened in 1989 in China is not Kent State. And Putin doesn't fit on the world's smallest political quiz from the Libertarian Party. I mean, it just doesn't work that way, okay? And we should increasingly try to learn about different countries, learn about their culture, learn about their views, right? Instead of trying to project our Western experience onto every country in the world. That's my view, right? Over 30 million Soviets, Russians died fighting fascists. I've heard 27 million, but 30 million, 20, okay, I hear you. All right. Someone said left-wing Jews are called traitors. And that's true. Look, there is a list on the internet, and I believe it's called the SHIT list, and it stands for Self-Hating Israel Threatening, and it's a list of Jewish people who oppose Israel. And I've known people that are on that list, and I'm proud to know them. That despite being Jewish, they stand up and say that Israel doesn't represent them and that they oppose vehemently Israel's crimes. Proud to know people who've been on the list. There's people on that list that I've been to their house and I've shook hands with them, and I'm very honored to know them. Left-wing Jews being called traitors, yes, and it's much harder, right? It's much harder, right? I mean, this is not just a political dispute. This is your family, right? I mean, if one is Jewish, you may have relatives living in Israel, for goodness sakes, right? And when stuff like what's going on there happens, it might be much harder for you to take a stance, right? And you might, be threatened with being disowned by your relatives or something like that. Again, as I said in my opening, we need to differentiate between Zionism, which is a political movement that is aligned with a state called Israel, and Judaism, the religion, which is a religion, and Jews as an ethnic group. These are different things. Jews as an ethnic group, look, I'm Irish, but I'm not Catholic, I have no loyalty to the Republic of Ireland, but I am Irish, right? That is my ethnicity. I'm Protestant, but I have no particular loyalty to any Protestant government around the world. And there are many Jewish people who, that is their ethnicity, that is their religion, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are loyal to, the state of Israel and the political movement that supports the state of Israel. It's called Zionism. Okay, what a night, folks. What a night. We've been all over the place. All right, China-Saudi relations. Well, look, China has a relationship with Saudi Arabia. China has a relationship with Iran. And the USA has been vicious to China because of their relationship with Iran. Right now, they're holding the CFO of Huawei Technologies in Canada, and they're trying to destroy Huawei Technologies, the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, because of China's relationship with Iran. China buys Iranian oil and all that. But yes, China buys Saudi oil. That is true. There is a relationship between Saudi Arabia and China. That is true. That is absolutely true. And again, China's position is that class struggle outside of their own borders is not their business. Marcus Garvey. All right, we'll talk about Marcus Garvey. All right. It's not their business. Like, that is their position, right? That class struggles outside of their own borders is not their business. That is their position. And China, China doesn't do business with countries on the basis of politics and class struggle. They do business with countries on the basis of what is in the interests of development around the world, building peace through international cooperation. So, yes, there is a Chinese-Saudis relationship. There you go. And the same, I guess I'll just answer this other one. Someone asked about what about Russia and China's relationship with Israel? Same thing, right? Now, Mao was a huge supporter of the Palestinians. Huge supporter of the Palestinians. Black Hammer. Huge supporter of the Palestinians. And, Mao met with Palestinians. There's speeches Mao gave to the Palestinians. China supported the Arab countries during the 1967 war. But China does business with Israel. That's true. And Russia does. Russia, the Soviet Union. Let's be real, okay? There would not be an Israel if it weren't for the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union under Stalin's leadership is very responsible for the creation of Israel. Now, things went sour pretty quickly, but 1948, the Soviet Union and the USA both supported the creation of Israel. The Soviets could have stopped it on the UN Security Council. They didn't. The Communist Party USA were big supporters of Israel, and they actually had a huge celebration in the streets of New York, a huge celebration and parade. Largely, it was Communist Party USA members who marched in the streets to support the creation of Israel. And also Henry Wallace, who was very good in many other ways. He protested against Truman at the time Israel was being created, not because Truman was creating Israel, but for the opposite, that he wasn't doing it fast enough, and that Henry Wallace and the left, the organized political left in the United States, were huge supporters of Israel. They believed that Israel would become a socialist country, right? Because of the kibbutz and because the Labor Party, the Israeli Labor Party, was a big party, because the Soviet Union and Israel were going to be aligned. Many people on the U.S. left thought Israel was a progressive thing, right? In fact, you want to know how much of a mistake this was. Go and see the movie Exodus. There's a movie that came out in the 1960s called Exodus, and it was written by a communist party USA member, Dalton Trumbo, wrote it. He wrote the movie Exodus, and it's a movie that portrays the creation of Israel as a heroic national liberation struggle. And it was written by a communist. And up until 1967, the Communist Party were huge supporters of Israel, the Communist Party USA. Now, the Soviet Union started to, not have a good relationship with Israel in the early 50s. But the Communist Party USA were 100% in Israel's camp until 1967. And in 1967, Gus Hall broke with Israel and wrote a very important document. This was a big mistake that our movement made, right? It's also important to note that when Israel was created, it presented itself as a left-wing country. It wasn't really until the late 70s and 80s that Israel started being more aligned with the right wing than with the left, right? And it was Republicans that were critical of Israel when Israel was founded. When Israel was founded, it was Republicans that thought, hey, the USA should leave this alone. This isn't our thing. And it was Democrats that were largely supportive of Israel. So Israel's political alignment has shifted over the years, right? Israel very much sold itself in left-wing terms in the 50s and 60s, but starting in the 70s and 80s, it sold itself in right-wing terms. And that's why right-wing Zionism is probably the majority current among Israel supporters at this point. But historically, that's not the case, and that things are complicated, right? But yes, the Soviet Union supporting Israel, that was a huge mistake. They were wrong to do it. Absolutely wrong to do it. All right, next question. All right. How would history be different if Wallace had been president, not Truman? Well, look, I hesitate to do this because there's a reason. It's not like things don't just happen, right? There's a reason that Henry Wallace didn't become president instead of Truman. He was pushed from the ticket. The Democratic Party was dominated by elements that did not like Henry Wallace and liked Harry Truman. But Henry Wallace was anti-Cold War. He wanted to maintain the U.S.-Soviet alliance. He was friendly to the Soviet Union. He was pro-labor. He was anti-racist and opposed Jim Crow segregation. So because of that, yes, obviously history would have been quite different, but that wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't going to happen. So, the Democratic Party was dominated by Dixiecrats. And Roosevelt was a Bonapartist. But the Cold War was getting going, and the ruling class was not going to have Roosevelt as a Bonapartist. So there you go. All right. The U.S. government, should it be more centralized, or should we have states' rights? I don't know. Look, this is the debate that's going on in U.S. politics. Generally, the term states' rights is a slogan that's associated with racism. Okay. 1948, back to that election, 1948, the Democrats and the Republicans were having an election. Harry Truman was the president. He was running for re-election. And Harry Truman, you'll recall, faced opposition from Henry Wallace. Henry Wallace formed the Progressive Party. He was aligned with the Communist Party, wanted to end the Cold War, etc. Right? And he was pushing anti-racism. And there was a fear that many black people would vote for Henry Wallace. So Harry Truman integrated the U.S. Armed Forces. So in response to that, the Dixiecrats, the Southern Democrats, rallied around Strom Thurmond. And Strom Thurmond broke away from the Democrats, and what did he form? He formed the National States' Rights Party. And in the electoral wing of the Ku Klux Klan in the 50s and 60s was called the National States' Rights Party. And the slogan states' rights generally, it is associated with racists, right? Racists, in the South, that was the argument of George Wallace and Strom Thurmond and all of them, is states' rights. Down here in Alabama, we can have segregation all we want. It's our state. Our state, the federal government needs to stay out of it. That's communism. If they come down here and tell us that we got to allow black people to drink out of the same drinking fountains as white people, that's communism. That's communism. States' rights, right? So states' rights as a slogan is generally associated with racism. Okay? Now, as a concept, it's much more complicated than that, right? There's a whole history, like, for example, before the U.S. Civil War, there was the opposite, okay? There was the infamous Fugitive Slave Law, right? Which was that it was a federal law that was passed that if a slave from the South ran away and got to the North, the states in the North were obligated to arrest him and take him back to the South. Well, there were a number of states in the North that said, no, we're not going to do that. We're against slavery, and we're not going to return fugitive slaves. And so they said it's our state's right not to cooperate with slavery. You know, so there you go. There are many examples of this, right? So it's just a question: how much autonomy? Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan. How much autonomy do states have? It's been an ongoing debate in U.S. history, right? How much autonomy do states have? You can't leave. That's one thing we obviously have pretty well determined. Goldwater, Reagan. We've pretty well determined as a country. We had this thing called the Civil War. And at this point, it seems pretty well established that you can't leave the United States. The United States is like a gang, right? You can join, but you never leave, right? When you're a jet, you stay a jet. Right? Isn't that from West Side Story? When you're a jet, you stay a jet. Well, when you become a U.S. state, you stay a U.S. state. Now, I know California and Texas, there's a big secessionist movements there. There's many people who want Texas to break away, many people who want California to break away. Good luck with that. Don't think it's going to happen. I mean, who knows? And things may develop in weird ways. But at the same time, generally, since the U.S. Civil War, we've argued states don't have the right to leave. But states generally do have the right to set their own laws around this or that. And so there you go. I don't honestly know. There are some cases where I would be for the federal government, and there are some cases where I would favor state autonomy. And it depends on the issue, honestly. I'm not a constitutional scholar. And ultimately, I believe in socialism. I don't believe in the U.S. system. I believe that we need to adopt a new system. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a whole new country. So, oh boy, greatest generation, more socialist than boomers. All right. Okay. So there you go. All right, folks. I'm going to start speeding through these super chats because it's getting late, but that's okay. All right. Israeli nukes. Israel has nuclear weapons. They won't admit that they have it, but they argue it is the worst kept secret in the world. Everyone knows Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So the USA cannot provide aid to Israel because that's a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's why the USA will never acknowledge that they know Israel has nuclear weapons, because then the USA would be in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Right? And that's one aspect of U.S. aid to Israel that's not widely discussed, is that Israel has nuclear weapons, and the USA gives them aid, and they've not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I actually asked this at the State Department. I confronted, which one was it? Mark Toner or Kirby, right? I think it was Kirby. One of them. I confronted one of those State Department guys about it. And that video went viral of me confronting a U.S. State Department official about U.S. aid to Israel. So there you go. All right. Socialist nations, how would they deal with an ongoing genocide in Yemen or Gaza? Well, when people ask me questions like this, we have to be careful here. Because socialism, whether or not a country is socialist, is not dependent on their foreign policy. You could be, like I said, the Soviet Union supported Israel. Not good. But did that make the Soviet Union not socialist? No. Right? That socialist countries, it's about who controls the means of production. If the means of production operate on the are controlled by society, operate on the basis of what's good for society, or they're controlled and there's a predetermined plan, that's socialism. The means of production operate according to the profits of private owners, that's capitalism. The government of socialist countries can do bad things. That said, right, how would socialist countries deal with the ongoing genocide in Yemen and Gaza? Well, there are measures that countries could take to deal with such things, right? Like raising it at the UN, like boycotting Israel. There are things that socialist countries could do as acts of solidarity, but whether or not they do those things doesn't determine whether or not they are socialist. Notice how people who loved FDR throughout the Great Depression At least one world war. Later generations didn't. What's the... Okay, all right. FDR. All right, we'll talk about FDR. FDR loved, not later. All right, cool. All right, we're going to start getting through these super chats because it's late. It's late. All right. All right, Jimmy Hoffa. Well, Jimmy Hoffa was the leader of the Teamsters Union. Jimmy Hoffa was trained by Trotskyites. Farrell Dobbs, who was the Trotskyite in Minneapolis, who led the Minneapolis Teamsters strike of 1934 and the siege of the Midwest, where the Teamsters Union expanded throughout the Midwest to Nebraska and places like that. You know, the Teamsters Union had a lot of Trotskyites in it, and they had a class struggle attitude. I mean, they knew how to fight dirty, and they didn't. They weren't about trying to just do everything by the book. They were about the struggle between the workers and the bosses. And I mean, as much as I'm critical of Trotskyism, I mean that's one good thing the Trotskyites did. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. The Trotskyites organizing the Teamsters Union, they did a good job of it. Jimmy Hoffa was not a communist, was actually a Republican and a conservative, but he learned how to union organize and how to fight dirty on the job from the Trotskyites. Jimmy Hoffa made an alliance really with the Republican Party. The Kennedy administration went after him, I mean, he eventually went to prison. Richard Nixon freed him from prison. And then he disappeared. We don't know what happened to him. And he was a union militant. Unfortunately, he was, I mean, he did fight against Cesar Chavez, which is not good. And he fought against the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. And there were instances where he did things that were not good. But overwhelmingly, he's remembered as somebody who was tough. And, the reason that a lot of working class people, around the country, truck drivers, etc., the reason that they have good wages is because of the militancy of Jimmy Hoffa. So he's a complex figure, but ultimately he's associated with much more militant fighting unionism than we have in our time. And that's why he's admired still. And his slogan was, if you bought it, a truck brought it. If you bought it, a truck brought it. So there you go, Jimmy Hoffa. Okay, I don't know about Erdogan's recent threats. I haven't been following that. I know Erdogan is very critical of Israel, leader of a Muslim country. So there you go. All right. Did Lin Biao originate Third Worldism? Not exactly. Lin Biao wrote a document called Long Live the Victory of People's War. And in that document, he argued that the way... I think they did, Austin. Yes, they did. If I'm familiar with that case, if that's the case I'm thinking of, the answer is yes, Austin. The answer is yes, but that's it. Yes, that's a fact. You can Google it. As far as Lin Biao and Third Worldism, he wrote this document called Long Live the Victory of People's War. And the document argued that basically socialist revolution globally would follow the pattern of socialist revolution in China. In China, Mao organized in the countryside, surrounded the cities, and then eventually went to the cities. Lin Biao argued that globally, the third world was the countryside, and socialism would go in the third world and surround the first world and then take the first world. That's a third worldist narrative. But Lin Biao never says that the working class in Western countries has no revolutionary potential. Lin Biao never says that all the working class people in the United States are labor aristocrats who benefit too much from imperialism. He never says that. So you can read third worldism into what Lin Biao wrote in that document, but it's not... There's some similarities, but it's not ultimately the same thing. But... yeah, Lin Biao. And, you remember Lin Biao eventually, had a falling out with Mao. And it was after the fall of Lin Biao, you got the rise of the Gang of Four. Why is the situation in Palestine much more visible than Yemen? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I can answer that. Why Palestine more visible than Yemen? All right. Very good. All right. The movie Reds Oh, I love that movie. I'll be honest. I think the movie Reds is subtly anti-communist, but it's a favorite movie of mine. It's a great movie. Like every work of art, the movie Reds reflects the time period in which it was made, not the time period in which it is set. It's set during the 19 teens, right? It's a fictionalized account of the life of Louise Bryant and John Reed. John Reed is the Marxist journalist who wrote 10 Days That Shook the World. Louise Bryant was also a journalist. They were partners. They went to the Soviet Union and covered the Russian Revolution, and they were key like founding members of the Communist Party of the United States. And Reds is really one of the only movies that at great length investigates American communists. It shows the Socialist Party splitting, it shows the founding meetings of the Communist Party, it shows John Reed in Russia, and it shows John Reed in the United States, and the fights in the Socialist Party and the labor movement. It's about Greenwich Village intellectuals in the 19 teens and early 20s. And their relationship with the Russian Revolution and how it happened. And it's a good movie. It is subtly anti-communist. It's not blatantly anti-communist, but it's subtly anti-communist. And I would argue that the very end of the movie, is an attack on the Iranian Revolution and leftists who support the Iranian Revolution. At one point, they have John Reed on a train in the southern USSR, and he's reading his speech, and his speech is being translated by the translator, and he's reading his speech, and then he says something, and then all these guys in turbans pull out their swords and start shouting, Allahu Akbar, and later he asks, why did they start shouting that? And they said, oh, we changed your speech to call for a holy war against the Western infidels. And he says, that's not what I wrote. And that was, again, it was supposed to be like an attack on, because the movie came out in 1980, a year after the Iranian Revolution, and it was a subtle dig at leftists for supporting the Iranian Revolution, right? And it's a good movie. Unlike again, Hollywood in the late 70s was much more sympathetic. I've never seen RoboCop. I've just never seen it. So I can't answer that. But Hollywood in the late 70s was a little bit more sympathetic to communists. A little bit more sympathetic to communists. And so even though it's a subtly anti-communist film, the communists in the film, John Reed, Louise Bryant, they're not portrayed as bad people. They're portrayed as good people with good intentions. It's kind of negative on the Soviet Union. Not completely negative, though. And it's kind of negative. Again, it's more about, it's kind of the American mind wrangling with the new communist movement and American communists and kind of going, why do Americans become communists? What are they like? And it's a good movie. I recommend it, even though it's subtly anti-communist. Not full on. It's not blatant anti-communist. It's subtle little things. But overall, it's a good movie. I like it. And it's important history. People should know why the Communist Party was founded. People should know who John Reed was. And you learn about the Socialist Party, and you learn about World War I, and it's a good movie. Okay. Why do people shun complexity and nuance? Because it's work. It's work. Should the state set wages in each industry? Should state set wages in each industry? All right. Because it's work. You have to actually learn something. Huey Long. All right. Huey Long. You have to actually learn something. You have to actually, understand what the other person is saying. You have to understand their position and speak to it. And people don't want to do that. People just want to pin a label on somebody. Oh, you're this. Oh, you're that. And that's much easier. It's much easier to hear half of what someone says and say, aha, that reminds me. And you don't have to actually do that. Nuance, complexity is work. It's intellectual work. And people are lazy at the end of the day. That's why and social media, again, people want instant gratification. And so they just jump on things. The anarchist imperialist alliance. I wouldn't call it that because, again, actual anarchists are better than this. Most anarchists out there, ideological anarchists who've studied Kropotkin and studied Bakunin, they're not like this. This internet cancel culture, crowd, they're an insult to the historical memory of so many great anarchists that have existed. Many great leftists, that have fought for the working people, like the Industrial Workers of the World, the Wobblies, were anarchists, and they were very, very good people who opposed wars and questioned things, and that this this bread tube milieu, they don't represent anarchism. All right. I don't know enough about the economies of Italy and Japan. Obviously, military spending was very big in both of their economies. Italy, Mussolini did set up like the corporate state, it was called, and in Japan you had the feudal structures of the emperor. But I know because I've studied Holomer Schacht and the Nazi economy. I know a lot about that. I just don't know enough about Italian and Japanese economics during the Second World War. The Tea Party. I think that you're right, that a lot of people in the Tea Party were interested in the Tea Party because they were economically frustrated. And they have been led to believe by neoliberal ideology that it's socialism, right? Everything is, it's all because of the government. It's all because of, government and socialism. They have the problems. But they know that they're ripped off. The taxation in the United States is a big ripoff. It's a big ripoff. I compare Reds to Taps, about an Afro-American dancer in the USSR. Haven't seen that movie, Old Gringo. I'll have to check it out. But yeah, the Tea Party, the tax system in the United States, they said Tea and Tea Party stood for taxed enough already. And yes, the tax system in the United States is a ripoff, right? Big corporations avoid paying taxes. Middle class people, small business owners, and well paid workers get ripped off, right? They pay, the burden while the rich walk away. And there's other taxes that hit working people, like sales taxes, and such. And, I mean, you buy anything in the United States, you're going to pay a tax. And, that hits, low income people much, much harder than it hits other people. If you save your money, you don't pay the sales tax. But working people that spend everything they have, live paycheck to paycheck, they're paying a much higher rate of sales tax, than other people. So the tax system in the United States is rigged. Our duty as socialists would be to go to the Tea Party and say, yes, the tax system is rigged. And yes, the government is out of control. And the problem is capitalism. We need socialism. That would be our duty, right? That's our duty, is we need to, whenever working people are in motion and are angry, it's our job to go to them and say, capitalism is the problem, socialism is the answer, and win them to anti-imperialism and Marxism. That is our job. Okay? That's our job. And it's harder with those folks. Sure, but that's our job. And, our job is also to do that in left-wing circles. And what leftists generally do, and I'll say this and then I'll move on because we got a lot of super chats to get through, but the problem with the organized political left in the United States is that when people are angry with the status quo in the United States, they do two things. If that person that's angry at the status quo is right-wing, if they're a Tea Partier, if they're in QAnon, if they're conservative, we cancel them. We say, you're a fascist, you're a racist, you're a bad person. We don't make any effort to try and win them to socialism. We just scream at them. Well, that doesn't work, right? And if the person is left-wing and they're mad at the status quo, what do? We just applaud it and go, yay! Right? If it's Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, we just go, yay! And that doesn't help either. Our job with the Tea Party and our job with Black Lives Matter is to go to both of them and say, Marxism. That's our job. That is what our job is. Whenever there is an uprising or a moment where people are at odds with the system or angry with the status quo, our job is to go to them and win them to our program. And whether that's our minimum program, right? Minimum program or our maximum program, our job is to go to people who are at odds with the system and win them to Marxism. That's our job. Right. Characteristics of modern Russia held over from USSR and punch anyone in the face. All right. In the face. All right. Oh boy. All right. Okay. Okie dokie. All right. What's next? All right. Okay, hardliners running Iran. There's a very, very good chance the hardliners will win the upcoming election in Iran, and that is because Rouhani, who was a moderate, um, okay, the movie was White Knight on Taps. Okay, thanks, old gringo. I'll have to check that movie out. Um, Hardliners running Iran. Rouhani, who came into office in the recent election and the last election, Rouhani came in, and his whole platform was he was going to negotiate with the United States, and that would make everything better in Iran. And he negotiated with the United States, and Iran's economy has gotten worse. And on top of that, the USA betrayed them, killed Qasem Soleimani, etc. So the promises of the Iranian moderates and reformists have all failed. So it's very likely that the hardliners will come back into office. Also, the gap between the rich and the poor in Iran is the highest it has ever been since the revolution. And the economic problems created by U.S. sanctions and the situation has made the division between the rich and poor in Iran bigger than ever. And the hardliners tend to favor more socialistic policies with the anti-capitalist principles of the Iranian Revolution. So on that basis, yes, it's very likely that hardliners will win the upcoming election in Iran. Very likely. We shall see, though. We shall see. We don't know. All right. Disagreements with dialectical materialism. Well, as I have said, I do believe in God. I do believe that often people do things that are not in their material interest. Often people can draw from some kind of consciousness that's higher than simply what is materially made available to them. But at the end of the day, yes, change comes through struggle. There are different classes that have different interests, but ideas are also important. And I don't think that ideas are merely a reflection of the material world. I do think that there are times where ideas can impact the material world. So I'm not a pure materialist. Yeah, and that's about it. That's really about it. Is that I do think ideas can reflect the world. I do believe in God and in a higher power. That's about it. Again, I think most change comes through struggle. But in some cases, just believing in struggle, like I said in my opening and my reflections on anti-During, there are times where struggle becomes too much, and that struggle can take on a destructive mode, and that thinking that struggle is always progressive and that clashing is always progressive is not necessarily correct. So there you go. All right. Richard Trumka. Well, when Richard Trumka was elected the head of the AFL-CIO, many saw that as a good thing. They saw it as a good thing because of the fact that that Richard Trumka had been associated with Camp Solidarity, that he was associated with the miners' unions in West Virginia and some of their more radical actions during the 1980s. During the 1980s, there was some militant actions. There was some of the strikes in West Virginia among the coal miners got pretty militant, and there was something called Camp Solidarity that was set up, and it was like an ongoing protest in West Virginia of miners, and Trumka was associated with that. And so when he became the head of the AFL-CIO, that was seen as kind of a turning point. It was seen as kind of a left turning point. And again, it was, with the Obama years, we saw the unions starting to play up more of a left-wing face. That said, he's pro-imperialist. He gave a big speech about why you should vote for Barack Obama. And honestly, it was a good speech. Racism is bad. And, he gave this speech directed at low-income white workers who are racist about why that's not good. And it's a beautiful speech he gave. And I think it probably won a lot of votes for Obama. I think there were a lot of, union members who were white workers who were racist who didn't vote for Obama. Now, I don't support Obama, and Obama was an awful president, so it's not necessarily a good thing. But it was nice at the time he made that speech. At the time he made that speech, it felt good to hear a strong anti-racist class solidarity speech from a white worker. Trumka, who's associated with the labor movement. So I liked that. But overall, look, he's pro-imperialist. He opposes boycotting Israel. He's a labor bureaucrat. He's labor bureaucracy, if there ever was such a thing. He's not a communist. He's not a revolutionary. You know, and you know, his leadership. I mean, this is the misleadership of labor, because we have labor unions that aren't led by people who believe in Marxism and class struggle, but instead buy into this idea that you know, we have a little bit of a problem. You know, there you go. All right. Okay. Mailbox union ballots in Amazon. I don't know enough about that. I didn't follow that as much as I should have, probably, so I just don't know enough about it. Okay, Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was you know, he was probably the most important black nationalist in U.S. history, right? There's been a lot more black nationalism since then, Malcolm X, Farrakhan, and others, but Marcus Garvey was before the Civil Rights Movement. He was in the 1920s, and he led the Back to Africa movement, and he was a very, I mean, it was a huge movement among black people. I mean, in terms of numbers, it was huge. I mean, it was a very big percentage of black Americans aligned themselves with Marcus Garvey. He had a huge following. And he was sympathetic to the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was against imperialism and against colonialism and was supporting African independence struggles. He was sympathetic to the Soviet Union. He was anti-Marxist, though. He did believe in black capitalism, and he, in the Communist Party USA, and him didn't have a particularly good relationship, unfortunately. I believe the Communist Party did support him, but they were, you know, it was not a very good relationship. There was back and forth tension. You know, but he was anti-imperialist, and yeah, I mean, he was a black nationalist, and as a Marxist, my feeling is that you should support all black nationalism, right? Black people fighting for their rights as a nation should be respected. You know, that said, he was anti-Semitic. I don't agree with anti-Semitism. You know, I think he, at some points, was blatantly anti-communist. I obviously am supportive of communism. But, you know, I mean, he did lead a massive black nationalist movement. So, yeah, Marcus Garvey, the Garveyites, they were called. And it was a massive movement. One interesting historical detail about Marcus Garvey that I think is fascinating is that Marcus Garvey burned the American flag at his rallies. His message to black people, he said, you're a nation, you're not Americans, you're a separate nation. So, at his rallies, they would burn the American flag. No one had an issue with that because the KKK and all the racists agreed. They said, yes, black people are not Americans. So everyone was totally fine with Marcus Garvey and the black nationalists lighting the American flag on fire. It was considered, oh, okay. It was kind of weird. Nowadays, there was all this effort to ban flag burning, and it was this big thing, you know. Back when Marcus Garvey and the Garveyites were burning American flags, nobody cared. So there you go. He eventually went to prison, I believe. He was put in prison, you know, and he believed it was a frame-up because they were afraid of his Back to Africa movement. I mean, he was just, well, thank you, Adam. Thank you very much. You know, he was a black nationalist leader from the 1920s. And it had a huge impact on the black liberation movement. Kinky pointed out in the chat that Malcolm X's father was a Garvey follower, and that's true. Yeah, he was a very prominent black nationalist in U.S. history. All right, who is Black Hammer? I mean, it seems so wrong to talk about Marcus Garvey and then talk about Black Hammer. Like, really, like, that's so wrong. Like, can you talk about two people that are, like, miles apart from each other, right? Marcus Garvey is this, like, dynamic figure that leads, like, millions of people. He's, like, you know, one of the most prominent, the first big prominent black nationalist. Black Hammer, not my favorite people, all right? Not my favorite people. And, you know, I mean, what they're doing with the Anne Frank burnings, and I'm sorry, like, they disgust me in many ways. They disgust me, and I don't want to really say too much more about it. You know, but, I mean, Black Hammer, look at their videos. This is really gross. It's really gross stuff. I respect black nationalism. I support black nationalism. I admire Minister Farrakhan. You know, a lot. I really look up to Minister Farrakhan and what he's done with the Million Man March, the New Black Panther Party. There's a lot of people in the New Black Panther Party that I admire. I absolutely admire the Black Panthers, but Black Hammer, no. It sickens me. I can't watch their videos. It just sickens me, right? And the Anne Frank stuff and all that. All right, I believe it's generally spelled, ThinkPad, it's generally spelled M-A-U, but I'll write it down. It's M-A-U, I believe, is how they spell it. But Mau Mau, right? Mau Mau. All right. Okay, all right. Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan. Well, Barry Goldwater was a U.S. senator who was very, very conservative and right wing, and he lost the 1964 presidential election. He ran against Lyndon Johnson after the assassination of Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson was running for president. He was already president after Kennedy was killed, but he was running for president, and Barry Goldwater ran against him. And Barry Goldwater was considered to be a far right winger. He was associated with the far right wing, with the John Birch Society and the crazy right wing. And Lyndon Johnson ran against him on this platform that he was a crazy right winger. He ran that very famous ad where the girl is like counting the flour, and then there's like a nuclear war. The message being, if you vote for Barry Goldwater, there will be a nuclear war. That was an infamous ad. The daisy, she's the girl with the daisies ad. It's very famous. There also was an ad where they showed the Ku Klux Klan, and they like were burning crosses, and they're wearing their white sheets, and it's like the Ku Klux Klan is this awful organization, and they're voting for Barry Goldwater, and like Barry Goldwater, it was weird, but it was, again, most of my childhood, and most of my political development was in a time where it seemed like the majority of the U.S. political establishment leaned to the right, right? The neocons, the late Cold War normal, the Bush years. But, starting with the Obama years, we entered a period where the political establishment in the United States leaned to the left. 1964 election, that was, the Kennedy had just been killed. And that was a period, where it seemed like the U.S. political establishment was leaning to the left. And Barry Goldwater was the guy that the Rockefellers hated. The Rockefellers left the Republican Party and voted for Lyndon Johnson because they thought Barry Goldwater was extreme. There was some quote about a whiff of fascism in the air, and that the Republicans, because they were dominated by John Birch Society elements and extreme right-wing elements, the establishment kind of didn't like Barry Goldwater. After Barry Goldwater lost the 1964 election, that's when the neocons started to assume the leadership of the Republican Party. And the neoconservatives were very much seen as correcting the right-wing extremism of Barry Goldwater. Ronald Reagan was a right-wing fanatic, but he was very much in line with the neocons, right? He was very, 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 very close to the neocons. And Ronald Reagan's ascendancy was the ascendancy of neoconservatism. Now, some will make parallels between Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan. They were both very right-wing guys. They were both hated by liberals. All that's true. But Reagan was a neocon. Barry Goldwater, he was somebody who that very much the neoconservative movement was a response to his epic loss. Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. He was just an awful human being. I've gone into his history with the Screen Actors Guild and then with General Electric, and eventually became the governor of California, and he hated protesters, and he liked to kick around the protesters, and he eventually became president of the United States, and he was an awful president. There you go. Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan, folks. Thank you, sir. All right. Okay, was the greatest generation more socialist than the boomers? I would argue that yes, they were. The greatest generation, because of FDR and the New Deal, they had more of a collectivism, more of a labor union mentality than the boomers. Boomers were more quote unquote left wing, but it was the new left. You listen to that very famous speech, right? What's this? The speech of the new left from 1964. There comes a time where the operation of the machine becomes so odious that you cannot even passively take part. You've got to glue yourself to the wheels and make sure clear that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all. It's like my right to be an individual, right? It's like that's the new left. New leftism is my right to be an individual. The greatest generation, it was more about collective struggle and effort, unions, etc. Unfortunately, though, because of that military mindset, they went along with McCarthyism, and they were much more like... But again, the new left was about struggling against Cold War social conformity. The greatest generation for them, leftism was about class struggle and economics, and, and they were much more labor-oriented. So, yes, I would argue that in a lot of ways, the greatest generation was more more socialist than the boomers. I would argue that's the case. The boomers were focused on individualism. Um, there's a quote from Jerry Rubin. Jerry Rubin, who was a big new left baby boomer. And he said that the greatest achievement of the boomers was that they got rid of the World War II mentality. Well, screw that. The World War II mentality, when the USA and the Soviet Union teamed up to defeat the Nazis, when Roosevelt called for an economic bill of rights to guarantee all citizens jobs, I'm sorry. I will take the World War II mentality over baby boomers smoking weed any day. Now, McCarthyism came after World War II, but McCarthyism is not the World War II mentality. The World War II mentality was very progressive. So, the Roosevelt, anti-fascism, aligning with the Soviets, supporting labor unions, economic bill of rights. I like the World War II mentality. The smoke weed and do your own thing, man, break out of the machine thing, not so much. Alrighty. All right. FDR was very widely loved at the time of his presidency. Why is he not loved now? Well, there's been a huge effort to undermine FDR. The Holocaust Museum in D.C. goes at great lengths to demonize FDR. FDR is the guy who led Americans in the fight to defeat the Nazis. And he convinced a U.S. public that was reluctant to support the fight against the Nazis to go and fight it. Roosevelt was supported by the overwhelming majority of American Jews. He defeated fascist coups against him. Roosevelt was very, very much a progressive, an opponent of anti-Semitism, an opponent of fascism. But the American Holocaust Museum goes at great lengths to try and undo that story and create the image that FDR was anti-Semitic. And why do they do that? Because FDR was anti-Israel. FDR was anti-Israel, right? He had no interest in supporting Israel. And this is well documented. You can read about this. There are people who worked in the White House that said if FDR had lived, had not died, there never would have been an Israel. He was vehemently opposed to the idea of creating Israel. But he was not anti-Semitic. And in fact, he appointed Henry Morgenthau, who was Jewish, to a very prominent position in his cabinet. And that was very controversial at the time. He wasn't opposed to it. He met with communist labor unionists at the White House. Gilbert Green, who was Jewish and was the leader of the Young Communist League, slept over at the Roosevelt White House. So FDR was not an anti-Semite by any means, but he was anti-Zionist. He did not like Israel, right? He identified Israel with fascism. He saw that, he felt that Zionism had more in common with fascism than with his progressive current, and he was anti-Israel. So that might be why he's been besmirched and smeared. May also be that in McCarthyism, at the time of McCarthyism, there was a huge effort to argue that FDR had been a communist, that his economic policies had created the Great Depression or made the Great Depression worse. There's been a huge effort to besmirch Roosevelt since his death because he was so effective, and he was so much of of a populist and a Bonapartist and such. Though I would say he's still widely loved. Roosevelt and Lincoln are the two most loved presidents in U.S. history. So there you go. All righty. Why is Palestine more visible than Yemen? For the very simple reason that in Yemen, the genocide, the crime is being conducted by Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has a big chunk of the Arab world that supports them, right? Whereas the Arab world there seems to be pretty universal anti-Israeli sentiments in the Arab world, right? Now, we know Saudi Arabia, that their intelligence agencies cooperate with Israel. We know that United Arab Emirates has recognized Israel, and so has Bahrain. But among the populations of the Arab world, there is almost universal opposition to Israel. However, Saudi Arabia, not so much, right? Saudi Arabia has a lot of people throughout the Middle East who think they're good folks and believe and hate Iran and think that, Yemen is really just a proxy war with Iran and stuff. There's a lot of Saudi influence in the Arab world. Israel is pretty universally hated in the Arab world. So that's the reason why we don't hear as much about it. All right. Hope that cleared it up for you. Should the state set wages in each industry? Not necessarily. It might be a good policy to have for a socialist government. It might not be. It depends on the situation. It depends on it. The question in governing and setting economic policy is this does this raise productive forces? Does this make a better, more prosperous socialist society, or doesn't it? And if it is determined that setting wages in every industry would advance material abundance and would make a more prosperous social society, then you should have that policy. If, however, setting wages in each industry would not do so, then you wouldn't want to set that policy. Again, socialism has many different forms. Cold War socialism, socialism with Chinese characteristics, the socialist market economy of Vietnam, Bolivarianism, Baathism, Nicaragua, and the Sandinistas. There are different forms of socialism. There are different forms of socialism in the world. All right. Huey Long. I think Huey Long was a great governor of Louisiana, right? He built a united front against Rockefeller and Shell Oil and Standard Oil. On that basis, he then built up a state apparatus that started controlling the economy of Louisiana. He wiped out illiteracy in the state of Louisiana. He built all kinds of highways and bridges and really made life better for farmers and working people. Huge amount of support among the working people of Louisiana. His career, he started out fighting the Ku Klux Klan and fighting for the rights of Roman Catholics in the Democratic Party. Michael Hudson Trott. All right. Fighting for the rights of Roman Catholics in the Democratic Party and fighting the Klan. Huey Newton is named after him. Huey Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party, is named after him because he was, viewed by the black community as an ally. He enabled black women to become nurses at a time that Jim Crow was in effect. So that's a huge. I mean, if you could pull that off, at a time when Jim Crow segregation was in effect, he changed the law to allow black women to become nurses. And his Share Our Wealth movement that he created, there were black ministers that were leaders of it. Huey Long was a progressive in many ways. When he was assassinated, his successor, the man who replaced him, was Gerald L.K. Smith, who was a fascist and was, the founder of the Christian nationalist movement and was an admirer of Hitler and such. And it was Gerald L.K. Smith, his lieutenant governor who replaced him, that dismantled everything Huey Long created. Huey Long created this network of, it was kind of a state-controlled economy in Louisiana. He created his own private army, his own militia that was loyal to him and the Share Our Wealth movement. He had a huge amount of money coming into the government of Louisiana, and that money was used to regulate the economy. There was almost a jobs guarantee that was created, wiped out illiteracy. I mean, it was you look at what Huey Long did in Louisiana, and it was very amazing. He was the Hugo Chavez of Louisiana. I didn't come up with that. That was actually Greg Palast who wrote about him as the Hugo Chavez of Louisiana. A great man in many ways. Unfortunately, he and the Communist Party didn't get along because he was a competitor with Roosevelt. He thought Roosevelt was too moderate and was not socialist enough. And so because of that, he was planning to run against Roosevelt in the 1936 presidential election. And, unfortunately, there were some people on the far right that also wanted to remove Roosevelt. So he had kind of a convergence of interest with the far right. The Communist Party was all about Roosevelt, so they saw him as problematic. But I view Huey Long as largely a progressive figure. After his death, you'll notice that a lot of the people associated with him became far right wing. But there you go. All right. All right. Characteristics of modern Russia held over from the USSR. I don't want to get into that too much, honestly. I don't know enough about it, and I don't want to say anything. I don't want to say anything that would offend somebody or something. You know what I mean? I've been to Russia a few times. I've seen a lot of the monuments that are still up. I know there's a huge amount of pride in the history of the Soviet Union, the defeat of fascism. There is very much a feeling that the state should control the economy for the good of the country, but they also, there is a big private sector in Russia now. There's also, there's a lot more inequality in Russia than there wasn't during the time of the Soviet Union. There's religion is very big. Orthodox Christianity is the state religion. But Orthodox Christianity does condemn capitalism and does talk about how money should not come, trade liberalization should not come before, before religious principles and right and wrong. So it's a different country. It's not the Soviet Union anymore. And I don't really, I can't tell you exactly. And honestly, just visiting a country one time, you don't really know the essence of it, right? I mean, I've been there more than one time, but, and so I don't know. I would ask somebody who's like lived in Russia a long time, ask a Russian that. Why don't you ask a Russian that? Okay. If I could punch anyone in the face, who would it be? Come on, man. Come on, man. I'm not going to advocate violence against somebody on my live. Do you think I'm stupid? You think I'm stupid? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to advocate violence against somebody on my stream. I'm going to pull a Joe Biden here and be like, come on, man. Come on, man. Like, I mean, don't ask me stuff like that, right? I mean, come on. Come on, man. Come on. Come on. What kind of question is that? All right. Someone asked about the Mau Mau Rebellion. That's the Land and Freedom Army. In the 1950s in Kenya, there was an uprising against the British colonizers, and it was called the Mau Mau Uprising, right? And it was called the Mau Mau Uprising. There's many theories about why they were called that. That was the nickname given to a group that was formerly called the Land and Freedom Army. I actually went to a class on it at the Brecht Forum years ago. When I first moved to New York, there was this building called the Brecht Forum, and it was like this building where you could go and study Marxism, and they eventually, they went out of business. They no longer exist, but I went and I actually, I read 2 books on, and we had a class to study the Mau Mau Rebellion. And I learned a lot about it. I'm really glad I went to it, and I learned a lot about the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya and the way that the British Empire put down the Mau Mau Rebellion was largely by rounding up a big chunk of the population of Kenya and putting them in concentration camps. Because they knew that the Mau Mau embedded themselves with the population. And so by rounding up big chunks of the population and putting them in concentration camps, it was a way to control them. It was horrendous, just horrendous, what they did. And, the massacres that the British conducted in Kenya, it was genocide. They basically conducted genocide in response to the Mau Mau uprising. And that's not discussed. The Mau Mau rebellion, it sparked genocide. And that the atrocities the British